Wait.
Some loud bragger.
Tries to put me down and
Is
says,
that
This is
beer?
beer is great.
Hey everyone, my name is Jake, and welcome to the 40th episode of Good Timin.
Oh
As
shit.
as always on this podcast, we're going to be talking about one of our favorite bands, the Beach Boys. And today we have a pretty interesting show in store for you all, as we're going to be covering two of the band's most notable live albums, Beach Boys Concert from 1964 and Beach Boys in Concert from 1973. As usual with our album discussion episodes, we're first going to go over the history of each album and talk about how they came together and where they were recorded. And then we will discuss each of the tracks one by one and share our own thoughts and opinions on them. Then at the end of the episode, we will also touch on a few of the Beach Boys' other live albums, such as Live at Knebworth and the 50th Anniversary Tour album from 2013. Joining me for today's episode, I have my good friends, Riley, Matt, and Nate. So, as always, I'm happy to have you guys here, and I'm looking forward to talking about these notable albums with you all. To kick off this episode, we're first going to talk about the first Beach Boys live album, Beach Boys Concert from 1964. So, before we dive into the album's history and track list, do you guys have any general thoughts on the record?
um, well, let me just start by saying that in general, I don't listen to live albums a lot. I just don't. And that's for any artist. It's not just like a Beach Boys thing. So this was maybe like the third or fourth time I've heard it. I think it's fascinating as a document and
Mhm.
kind of like shows their popularity at the time. But as an album itself, I think it's just all right. I think that partially part of the problem was just the technology wasn't really there in the 60s to really get a good live recording for a band like this, because obviously you're gonna have a ton of screaming fans. And then a lot of the tracks are just kind of overdubbed in the studio. So it's fine for what it is. I think it's also kind of interesting that this was their first number one album. Again, kind of shows just how popular they were at the time. But yeah, so I like it as like a historical document more than anything else.
As somebody who does listen to a lot of live albums and is a big fan of a lot of live albums and like live versions of songs, in many ways this one was pretty disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say it's bad. I think the songs were great, and I'm glad that you got a lot of covers in there that sound like our Beach Boys-esque songs that you got finally get to hear the Beach Boys do. But it is a little disappointing where there's a lot of overdubs. I think some of that's just the technology, though, where they couldn't really get the perfect live sound from the live show. I also think with a lot of like the screaming fan stuff, it was them trying to combat Beatlemania, where like you have like a lot of the screaming fans associated with the Beatles. Well, the Beach Boys got that too, so I feel like they kind of tried to do as much of that as they could. But I mean, I'm glad we got a version of the early '60s Beach Boys doing "Little Old Lady from Pasadena," and Long Tall Texan's a pretty iconic live track of the band from this time. So it's definitely a timepiece. But in terms of like an actual live album, it's kind of disappointing.
Nate?
Yeah, I do think that, like you guys have all alluded to, obviously the fidelity and some of the arrangements are going to sound a little wonky. Uh, However, I do think that it really cemented what the general public came to know the Beach Boys as, just as much as any of their studio albums, if not more, because of the fact that it sold so many copies and was so successful. I think the fact that it has so many of those 60s party standards like Johnny Be Good and Little Old Lady and The Wanderer really showcase the Beach Boys in a way where they're sort of entertainers, and they've always sort of made their shows like a party. And I think it captures that well. And these types of shows solidified an audience that the Beach Boys still have to this day, where they might not be the kind of audience that listens to Pet Sounds or Love You, but they're the kind of audience that will dance in the stands to Johnny Be Good or Little Old Lady, even though those aren't technically Beach Boys songs, you know? Like
Mhm.
those are the kind of fans that are still with the band to this day, largely, that fill the seats at their shows. So there's a connection from this album all the way to present day with how the Beach Boys still present their shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what you guys said. I think in terms of like capturing like the atmosphere and the vibe of like their concerts around that time, I think it's a cool kind of like historical document, like Matt said. But as a actual like listening experience, yeah, I can't say I'm really that blown away with this. I think that the crowd noise is very annoying and loud. I understand that like the technology at that time wasn't there to drown that out, but really, I feel like the crowd noise really overwhelms a lot of the music, which is unfortunate. And as Nate kind of mentioned, a lot of these tracks, there's a lot of studio work, a lot of post production work done in terms of like overdubbing, and in a couple of cases, literally just taking the original backing track and just putting crowd noise over it and changing a few things. So definitely not the most like genuine live album, but again, the technology wasn't there at the time, so I can't hold that too much against them. Like you guys mentioned, it's cool that this was like their first #1 album. It's kind of an interesting fact that it went #1 and some of their others didn't. But I think that probably has something to do with like when it was released. I don't know how many other albums this was competing against at the time, so it might have been one of those things where like the stars kind of aligned for this to go #1. But yeah, that said, there are some really cool covers on here, like you guys mentioned, and re-listening to it today, a few of these grew on me quite a bit. So I'm looking forward to discussing them today. So
You said you wanted to know when this came out. This came out October 64. So around that time would have probably been, as far as like big albums on the charts, I think that would have been just before Beatles 65. I imagine like the My Fair Lady soundtrack was right around the corner too. I know that was a huge seller. Other than that, I'm not really sure what would have been a big seller around that time on the album charts.
I
I
imagine like for the Christmas audience, this probably was like, a good purchase along with like the Christmas album in terms of like a gift for the holidays, So I'm sure that that probably helped it sell as well. So
That was a big factor in its release.
This was also around the time that I think people really started buying rock albums, because I know that before then, like what most people were buying on like albums were like the jazz things, the soundtracks, the cast albums, easy listening. So I think it was also kind of hitting the zeitgeist at the right time, if you know what I mean.
all right. So Nate, do you kind of want to go into this album's background and history and kind of how the band put this together?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the Beach Boys, it's easy to imagine them having these big concerts, maybe in Hawthorne in their hometown. But the truth is, their first really big shows were in Sacramento, and those shows were organized by Fred Vale.
Hmm.
And he's the voice that you hear at the beginning of the album introducing the band. And he would be a fixture in their story for a long time. Uh, but this album's really interesting because it was actually in the works for a while. They made two attempts at recording it in 1963. Nothing from the first attempt was used. And then they did another attempt in December of 63. And it's something interesting to note is that Brian wasn't even at that show. That was a show where you had David Marks and Al Jardine playing together. And then they did their next attempt in August of 64, which is interesting because it's so close to when the album came out. And that just shows you how quickly they were working in those days. So the album is definitely a hodgepodge of those different shows that I mentioned. And almost all the vocals were redone in the studio. Just because if you listen to the Sacramento one, you can clearly hear that the microphones were going in and out, and Carl and Al were sharing microphone, a single microphone. So the balance between those guys was sort of messed up, and the screaming was drowning everything out, and the microphones weren't even great to begin with. So they redid a lot of the vocals in the studio. But nonetheless, it's like you guys mentioned, a great document of the Beach Boys at the time. And you've got Dennis's great drumming. And really they could have, the Sacramento tapes do show that they could have just released that and fans would have eaten it up, no doubt. But Brian was such a perfectionist that that's why they did so much tweaking after the fact, because Brian wanted it to stand up with their other work at the time, which was a smart move, clearly, because it sold so well. And it does stand up on an album as its own. And that is also the reason why they included so many covers, is they didn't really want the fans to feel ripped off by buying all the same songs again.
Hmm.
So the idea was, they played all those covers regularly at their shows, but the idea of putting the album together this way was so that the fans wouldn't have to buy the same songs all over again and still had new songs to listen to.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention about this album that I like, even with all like the overdubbing and the post work, production work done, I do like that like it does kind of show their personality a bit. You have some real fun moments on some of the novelty songs where the guys are doing some goofy vocals. Obviously, on Little Deuce Coupe, there's like that fun intro where they like introduce each of the different parts, like oh Denny on the drums and Carl on lead guitar. So I do like that quite a bit. Again, like the Beach Boys, I feel like never really had like the clear identities that like the Beatles had with the public, where like everybody kind of like had a general idea of like who each Beatle was and like what they represented. Where like the Beach Boys, like, you know, there were different elements. Like people knew Dennis as like the sex symbol and like Brian as like kind of like the genius behind the band, but like really they didn't really have that same like individual identities that the Beatles had. So I think that like, you know, hearing this album, hearing their personalities is kind of fun. So
That's why they needed to do a Hard Day's Night type movie, because then people would have howdies, but that
yeah.
never came into fruition, unfortunately.
All right. So do we want to get into the track by track rundown now? All right. So the album kicks off with Fun, Fun, Fun. And right away, listening to this today for the first time in a while, to my ears, this sounded like the studio recording and of the song, like the backing track, and they just put like some screaming over it, and Mike's vocal sounds a little bit different. It's almost like more nasally sounding, at least to me. Um, I get that like the screaming is trying to capture like the atmosphere of their concerts, but like in this case, I think it's way too loud. Like it's completely drowning out the track. I think Nate kind of told me before we were recording this episode that part of the reason that they drowned out the track so much is because they're trying to hide some of the production work that they were doing in terms of editing it to make it sound like a real concert. But yeah, overall, I wish they had used an actual live recording of this song. Listening to those Sacramento tapes from like 1964, I think the song sounds really energetic and rocking. I know that the crowd noise is there, but I think that the band sounds great and the song really rocks. So it's disappointing to me that they used the studio backing track on this, and for that reason, it's not really a track I really would ever revisit. So, what do you guys think of this opening track? Fun, fun, fun.
You got it spot on, man. I think it was just it's literally the studio backing track with some screaming recorded, probably from the concert. Although I wouldn't be shocked if they just recorded the screaming in the studio, and then it's just a different Mike Love vocal over it. I mean, it sounds cool. It sounds like it could have been in concert,
Yeah,
but like maybe if now that I know the information that a lot of this stuff was just overdubbed, it's like, yeah, this is very clearly just this
yeah.
is kind of like Party, where they just kind of like hodgepodge like a bunch of like stuff that's live, and it's just
Yeah. Like
overdubbed.
to a casual listener at the time, I'm sure that this could totally fly over their heads and think, oh, like this sounds
It
like
flew over my head for a couple of years, man, too. It's
yeah.
just
But
Yeah.
once you listen to the studio version, you're just like, oh, this is literally just the studio version, and they just gave it a different vocal. And Mike's vocal isn't even as good either. It's like more nasally sound.
Yeah, keep in mind too that back in the day they were probably listening to them on those really crappy turntables where
Oh,
like,
right, that
it's
too.
gonna be all muddled and you're never going to be able to hear the
Yeah.
minute details that we hear now with, you know, the
Yeah.
phones and all the digital thing. But yeah, I agree. I think it's got a lot of energy and it's a fun opener, but it doesn't really, it's not too dissimilar, as you mentioned, from
fun,
the
fun, fun opener.
It's a fun opener. It is, and I like that. Probably what I'm thinking. This is what they probably did. They probably spliced in the Fred Vale thing, overdubbed the screamings,
Yeah.
took the backing vocal, and maybe they had Mike just like sing a new vocal over it, like in a one take, and just kind of.
So yeah, to my understanding, you guys were really close. It's not the exact same backing track because it's the backing track minus the overdubs, which is actually unique, and I think it is actually a redeeming aspect of this version because the final version of Fun 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 is kind of overdubbed to hell with a lot of drum fills and saxophones and organ and so on and so forth. But they used really just the rhythm track for this version. So it's just the guitar and the bass and the drums. So it's kind of like a more stripped back, raw version of Fun Fun Fun.
Mhm.
And what they did for the vocals, to my ears, is it sounds like on the original Fun Fun Fun, it's a double tracked lead. And it sounds like they just used one of the two tracks that they did for the double as what they have on the album here. And the reason it sounds so nasal is because it's actually sped up a whole musical half step. So really the studio recording originally is in the key of E flat, but they sped it up to E because that's how the band always played the song live because it's easier to play in E standard on guitar. So the reason they sped it up was to make it sound like the way it sounded when they played it live in E.
So they did attempt to give it some like authenticity in a way, even though like it was like a studio track. They did try to give it like that more live sound. So that's good to know.
It's funny how it goes. Allegedly, the legend goes that they actually did track live in the studio version that eventually came out on that Keeping the Summer, not Keeping the Summer Alive, Keep an Eye on Summer box set. And when they were recording that, eventually in the process, Brian just thought, what the hell? We're recording a whole new version in the studio. Let's just use the studio tracks that we have already and mess with those.
Yeah.
So I do think the song, uh, like you guys said, the screaming is really loud. It hurts your ears depending on what stereo or what headphones you're listening on. But with that said, when I do choose to listen to this album, my brain sort of eventually starts to drown out the screaming, and I just kind of feel like the frenzied energy of as if you were there. And it's a good starter. I do think Fun 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 is truly meant to be the closer. It's like
Yeah.
the best closer ever written. But it's funny to hear back then them playing it as an opener.
Yeah. All right. So the second track on Concert is Little Old Lady from Pasadena. I think this is a solid version of the Jan and Dean song. I think Mike gives it a pretty good vocal. But once again, the screaming on this one kind of hinders it for me. It's like after each chorus, like there's just like a lot of loud screaming, and it really kind of like drowns out the track, which I don't like at all. I asked Nate about this before we recorded, and you can kind of go into this, Nate, once you share your thoughts. But I noticed listening to this song back to back, this version and the version on the Sacramento 64 compilation, which is like the live recordings that they pulled from for this album. I noticed that like in those recordings, there's more of like an echoey sound to the performance where it sounds like it was almost recorded from the crowd. Whereas in the Sacramento recordings from that compilation, it sounds more like a straight up soundboard recording, which I kind of view it as like maybe they're trying to create like the concert atmosphere, the concert sound. But to me, I honestly probably would have preferred it if they had just used like the more like soundboard type recording that they used from the Sacramento 64 compilation. So, Matt, do you have any thoughts on their cover of Little Old Lady from Pasadena?
I think it's interesting to hear them do this song. I think it's a solid cover. I also know, I know we mentioned this earlier, that this album kind of solidified some of their image in the popular mindset. And I think that this song is a good example of that, because I know that there are a lot of people that think this is a Beach Boys song. And I think partially that can be traced to, I would be surprised, this live recording, since this album was so popular. And I don't know if any of our listeners have seen it. Have you guys seen that interview they did with like that lady? I think her name is like Ida Blackburn or something. Like,
Yeah,
you've
Yeah.
seen that interview? And I think she even mentions one of these songs. And then like Brian's like, that's Jan and Dean. Like she
yeah,
kind of
Little Old Lady, yeah.
almost like it's their song. So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a cool cover. It's a nice version. But yeah, just a lot of screaming, which is par for the course with this record.
This is as you could probably say with a lot of Jan and Dean songs from 63, 64, this is the Beach Boys song that never was. Because when I hear them do it, part of me thinks that if they did it in the studio, it probably could have been better than the Jan and Dean version. Just because when he actually says "Little Old Lady from Pasadena," I think he hits that note really well. I think Mike gives a great live vocal. I don't know if it's studio overdub or not, but a good vocal for sure.
Yeah.
Would have sounded like rather than this quote unquote like live version. So
Isn't there one on Salute NASCAR?
that doesn't count.
Yeah, so this sort of set the precedent for the rest of time of people eternally sort of getting the Beach Boys and Jane and Dean mixed up. Actually, you can even set that marker earlier. And I think it was just somewhat destined that they would always kind of share each other's songs. After the fact that for a while the Beach Boys did play backup for Jane and Dean as their backup band. And with Brian being part of Jan's team and writing songs for Jane and Dean, they just have so much shared musical DNA, and they both sang on each other's songs in the studio and they performed each other's songs on stage. So it's nice to have a document of that going all the way back to the beginning. And like Riley said, it is like this kind of weird alternate universe thing to listen to Mike and Brian singing the Jane and Dean song. And it's interesting too because there's an extra verse that's not in the Jane and Dean version. That in the Jane and Dean version, they had written the lyrics already, but eventually they replaced the verse with the harmonica solo. But they had sent the earlier tapes prior to adding the harmonica solo to the Beach Boys for them to learn the song to play live. And they wanted the Beach Boys to play the song live before they released it as a single so that everyone would already know it, and that it would just instantly have that boost in popularity from the Beach Boys getting it out there. So it worked really well. And they would continue to do things like that for a while where Jane and Dean would play new Beach Boys songs and Beach Boys would play Jane and Dean. So it's really cool. There are very few bands that are so interconnected like that. I can't really think of many.
All right, so track 3 on the album is Little Deuce Coupe. On this one, I do like the fun little intro that they do where they talk about, like how we make a Beach Boys record and they introduce each of the different parts, like Denny on drums and Carl on lead guitar, Brian on bass. So I think that's a lot of fun. In terms of the performance, like the actual performance of the song, I think it's pretty enjoyable. The screaming on this one isn't as distracting as the previous 2 tracks. I would still take the original studio version over this any day. But I do think that it's a pretty enjoyable performance and it's one that I can come back to and enjoy. So what do you guys think of Little Deuce Coupe on the album?
Lil Deuce Coupe. For me, I like the intro more than I like the performance. I think it's a solid performance, but I think you kind of hit the nail on the head where it's just kind of a little forgettable. But I do really like that intro where it's like, this is how we make a Beach Boys song. I think that makes it special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only thing that makes this one special is the intro. I think that it was something that they often did. They didn't do it just for this particular set of shows. So I think it's cool to get that kind of time capsule. I do think that that part was probably recorded fully live, as far as I know. Nick could probably correct me on that. So that's really cool.
I
But
think
other
you're
than
right.
that, it's kind of just it's the Beach Boys doing Little Deuce Coupe. Nothing special, but
Yeah, I'll say that hearing that intro was like so prolific, such a prolific moment on the rest of my life. And when they go, this is how the bass goes, and this is how the guitar goes, and this is how we make a song, like that really blew my mind as a kid because I was just getting into producing my own songs and trying to put my own songs together and listening as hard as I could, trying to figure out how the Beach Boys played their instruments the way they did. But, I was so early in my days as a musician that it was hard to dissect the parts. And it was before now you have AI and you can dissect the parts into a million pieces, but not back then. So when I discovered this intro to the song and hearing those separate pieces, it was like such a revelation. And it was like, like this is how they do it. And I know it sounds simple, but this is like when I was still learning what a bass guitar was and what rhythm guitar and lead guitar. And so it was so informative to, 11-year-old me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I just still listen to that all the time and remember those memories. And like Riley said, it's the Beach Boys playing Little Deuce Coupe. And while to a lot of people that might be a bit of a yawn, I think it's great. And I think the track does have a lot of exuberance. And I just love hearing 1964 Brian Wilson singing those parts. Because, give it a few years and he wasn't really ever able to sing those parts the same way again. So it's great to hear him just wailing away on these songs.
Imagine the band doing that kind of like intro where they intro each part, but during like the late 70s, like during the Love You era. Like we have Brian on synthesizer.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty wild. All right, so the next track in the album is Long Tall Texan. So this one I mentioned it on our covers episode briefly. I really enjoy this one quite a bit. I think it's a really fun cover, really fun performance. I really like Mike's lead vocal, and the backing vocals from the guys. I also like that. I think it's Mike with the hurrah, hurrah, is that my horse? I like that a lot. So it's a fun performance, kind of the band doing more of like a country style song. But I think it actually works really well, and it's one of the tracks that I do come back to from this album. So I think it's a really fun cover.
Yeah, I'm not usually the biggest fan of the novelty songs, but this one I think kind of works because I think it's a good opportunity for them to show off their personality.
Yeah.
I think Mike, it's good for Mike too because he really shows it off well. He sings it well. But another one too that the screaming is just kind of random in this one.
Yeah.
And then just all of a sudden the scream would just come out of nowhere. But yeah, I agree with everything you said.
yeah, I think I lied. I think this is actually my highlight. I kind of forgot about this one. Shows you how much I listened to this album. But
Yeah.
no, I think that this is one of those songs that I really wish we got like a genuine live recording of it because I feel like this is Mike Love like doing his. I wish I got to mention this in the Mike Love episode. Just him just going full Mike Love, full attitude, full swag, and just like I think he really nails this song. I think this is one of those songs that his voice is perfect for. It brings the exact energy that you need. I kind of wish we got that Country Love album, except with a bunch of new songs. I think Mike actually has a pretty good voice for that kind of stuff. That's why I think that's why I like a lot of the Celebration material because it's a little bit country influenced. And I feel like it really works for him. Um, but I really like this one. I think he just brings a lot of energy to the table, and it sounds great. I just wish we didn't have all that damn screaming.
Yeah, I can really see how this album likely probably influenced bands like the Ramones and a lot of like the punk rock that would come in the following decade and later on. Because even there's like a sort of punk like unseriousness to the way that they perform some of these novelty songs, you know? Like I think whereas Jane and Dean did a lot of novelty songs as like their whole niche for a while. I feel like the Beach Boys kind of did these novelty songs as sort of like taking the piss and like sort of just having a ball, you know? So to me, this is actually one of those covers that becomes more associated with the coverer than the original artist.
Mhm.
Uh, I think a lot of people would think of this as a Beach Boys song, and I think most would be hard pressed to name the original artist. I don't even think I can. But it's even a significant enough song for the Beach Boys that they included it of all songs in their documentary recently, which is, really notable when you think about it.
Yeah.
I think it's a song that a lot of people would remember them playing back in the day, so that's probably why they included it. But it's a lot of fun, and it is kind of interesting that they ended up doing the studio version in the 90s. But
Yeah.
this live version is definitely one of the highlights of the album. And it's just I really like you can hear like Brian laughing a little bit, and it's just a lot of fun.
So up next is In My Room. I think this is a really good performance, but I am a little bit curious. Maybe you can go into this, Nate, how much post-production work was done on this, because it almost sounds like too clean to my ears, where it almost sounds like they were like maybe some of this was done in the studio. I know this was one of the recordings that I believe was from the 1963 show that they pulled from. I think Long Tall Texan was from that recording as well. But yeah, I think it's a good performance, but I just don't know how much of this was truly live. If it was mostly live, then I'm impressed by it, but I'm not sure. So you can go into that when we get to your thoughts. But
Took the words out of my mouth. Same thing. Sounds great, but to me, very clean. Almost like
yeah,
pulled the vocals from the original and just slapped it on there and just overdubbed, screaming and stuff.
Couldn't have said it better. This is almost too good to be true. There's no way this shit was live.
Nate.
Right, right. I mean, for me, this one, I mean, a lot of these songs are a bit of a mystery. I've heard different people, different even experts assert, no, this one's fully recorded in the studio, this one's live, this one live instruments, recorded, but a lot of people have a different opinion on how these were made. But even just setting that aside and just enjoying the music, I do think that this is a gorgeous performance. Whether it was in the studio or on stage, either way, it was really well performed. I think Brian may hit a funny bass note here and there, but it's part of the charm. And it's easy when, even as with myself as a musician, comparing myself to someone like the Beach Boys, it's easy to get down on yourself when you hear something like Pet Sounds or Summer Days, where all the musicianship is immaculate. And you think, how could I ever compare to this? But then you hear an album, like this concert album, and the guys are a little rough around the edges and they might hit a bum note here and there. But it's part of the charm, and it's what makes the music feel youthful and feel, to me, this album feels a lot like a high school dance or kind of sock hop vibe, which the Beach Boys actually did play quite often in these days. So that's part of just that quirky charm that the young Beach Boys had.
So it's like Telephone Hour and Bye Bye Birdie vibes. Like when they're like,
Yeah.
seen that movie, right? Yeah.
Yeah, like Hairspray, that whole kind
Yep.
of feeling.
All right. So next up, we have another novelty track, Monster Mash. So this one, the lead is performed by Boris Love, which is how they introduced Mike on here. I have to say, this is a very quirky vocal from Mike. It honestly doesn't even sound like Mike at all. Like if you told me this was someone else doing like this wacky voice, I would totally believe you. But I think his quirky voice fits the song well. I think it's a pretty solid performance, and it's cool to hear the Beach Boys cover this kind of song. That said, it's definitely not an essential listen. I will say though, the video of them performing this live on Shindig is pretty funny. Mike making those funny facial expressions and just the acting he's doing on stage is very entertaining to watch. I know there's like that meme that goes around occasionally on social media of Mike like making that weird, obnoxious face with the microphone. And I think that was taken maybe during this song. But yeah, I think it's a cool performance, but not one that I think is essential listening by any means.
Yeah, I think it's very fun. Another good opportunity for Mike to show off his personality. And like you said, like the vocal doesn't really even sound like Mike. It's like he's like
Yeah.
putting on a voice. Also, I wanted to say one last thing about that Shindig thing. I love when Brian screams at the end. Is that
Oh
the
yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
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 Yeah, I think that a lot of those like faces of Mike in concert, I'm pretty sure have been pulled from various performances of this because he used to
Yeah.
just pull the weirdest freaking faces while singing. But it's very fun. You know, it's the fun song, and I think it works better in a live setting than a studio recording. I don't think a studio recording of this would have worked very well.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I never really liked this one until I saw the video of them doing it on Shindig. I just thought it was Mike Love being annoying. But then you kind of you listen to songs like Long Tall Texan, and then you listen to this, and then you kind of see the live performances of these songs, and like love him or hate him, you got to admit he's a pretty damn good frontman from 1964 because you don't see any other frontman from this time doing this shit.
Mhm.
Kind of see his influence
Yeah.
other people like David Lee Roth and a lot of those guys who like prance around on stage. Love them or hate them, you got to admit Mike Love definitely influenced those guys with this kind of attitude. And I think that him doing this is probably something that few other quote unquote frontmen would do around this time. So I got to give him credit for that. And as for the song, I do enjoy it, but really only around Halloween.
Yeah.
Like, I can't listen to it when it's freaking December 8th, man. It's like,
I do think that you make a good point about him being a good frontman for the era, Riley, because I think that that was I think that he was really the only one in the group that could have pulled this stuff off at the time. I just think that a lot of the other ones were either like under seasoned or just didn't really have the
Yeah.
yeah, and that's not to say that like the Beatles weren't they're doing like pretty cool stuff. Like I think they all had like snarky personalities, but like when it comes to like actual frontman behavior, I mean, you didn't see John Lennon doing this shit. You didn't see Paul McCartney doing this shit.
And
Yeah.
allegedly, even Mick Jagger was pretty shy in the first few years, is what
Oh
people
yeah, you
say.
look at
It
him on
wasn't,
stage, he's just holding the microphone. I mean,
Yeah, but then he
yeah.
became all prancing around and like the
Yeah. Well,
Jagger.
he was too chicken shit to be on stage with the Beach Boys. So
What if Mick Jagger discovered future Mick Jagger moves by watching Mike do the Monster Mash on TV? The world might never know. But
Mick
you know,
Jagger's
to
too
me,
chicken shit to sing Monster Mash.
it's so it's like the epitome of Brian and Mike's sort of goofy sense of humor that they took this song that everyone in the world understands to be a Halloween song and they were like, let's perform this all year long. Let's perform this
Oh,
just as a regular part of our set. And they did in you know ever since the song was a hit all the way through 65, 66, they would play this extremely regularly. And they even chose to perform it, on TV and stuff. So I think they just had so much fun performing it.
they beat the Cramps by like 20 years by doing scary music all year round.
Yeah. So to me, it's like in line with some of the future just funny songs like Shortening Bread or this and that, where you just think like, oh my gosh, these guys are hilarious. That you could just picture Brian like, yeah, we're gonna play this in July. Um,
Oh
so
yeah, I forgot, dude. Brian was the one who really made the set list and stuff, right?
yeah, yeah. So just funny stuff, and I am glad that this version exists. As charming as the original is, this one like is just downright rock and roll. Like it's got the Fender kind of surf guitars, Carl's like Jaguar sound, and Dennis's drums. So I dig it.
All right, so next up we have Let's Go Trippin', which is obviously an instrumental from the Surfin' USA album. I have to say I actually probably prefer this concert version of the instrumental to the original. To me, it sounds more raw and energetic. I think Carl sounds great on it. His guitar playing, again, I don't know how much of this was just done in the studio, but regardless, I think he sounds fantastic considering how young he was. And honestly, Riley will be happy to hear I could actually see myself coming back to this specific performance of the song. I think it's kind of like what Matt said, I think, about the Monster Mash, where like in the studio, like their studio performance of this doesn't really do a whole lot for me, but like hearing it in what sounds like more of a live context, it works more for me. I don't know. It just kind of it clicks more. So what do you guys think of the version of Let's Go Trippin' on here?
First of all, I want to say I do love how Mike gets the crowd ramped up and he's like, oh, tripping. Like the whole place is just screaming. You know, those are always the best vibes. But yeah, no, I think this has a lot of energy. It kicks ass on here. I
Yeah.
think what helps is probably all the reverb, whether that was in the studio or in the auditorium. A lot of times when you like just drench things in reverb, it gives it a nice jolt. I think that's why I remember I had mentioned to you Roll Over Beethoven. When you listen to the version of the second album, the stereo one, the American one, it's like drenching all this reverb and it just sounds so much better. I think it's kind of like a case of that here. And I also think the problem with the Surfing USA version is like I think the production, they were still kind of finding their way production wise there. So it just doesn't really have the energy that I think a song like that needs. But yeah, I agree with everything you said.
I don't know if I prefer it to the studio version they did, but it is really damn cool. It definitely matches the Dick Dale version a little bit more.
Mhm.
Um, I think maybe if you got rid of all like the crowd shit and like it'd sound a lot cooler, and I definitely prefer it to the studio one. Um, it does have that reverb, but it also has that cranked treble. It definitely sounds a lot more like surfy, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of so used to the Surfing USA version because that's really like the instrumentals on that one when you put them all together. I don't know. Nothing's gonna beat the Dick Dale version though. That one's just
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Nate.
I think I'm team prefer this version. Uh, as you know, Carl's guitar is obviously the spotlight of the recording, but what for me, what sets it apart is Dennis's drums, dude. Like, holy shit. Brian kept Dennis's drumming really controlled in the studio, especially on like the early like Surfing USA. Like, he would probably keep Dennis to a very specific tempo and tell him to play lightly so the balance would remain intact. But, Brian had way less control over Dennis when they were performing concerts. So Dennis just lets it rip on the drums and plays like at an almost comically fast tempo, and I think he finishes at probably a dozen BPM faster than he starts the song, just cranking ahead like a freight train. And so I just love Dennis's drumming here, the super fast drum rolls, and he's just bashing those cymbals. And it really shows that the Beach Boys could really rock. Like a lot of their songs have a early rock and roll kind of charm, but this one is just, balls to the wall, like surf madness. So I love it. I love it. It's like the Wilson brother instrumentally just going bananas. Carl's great guitar, Brian on the bass, Dennis on the drums. Super sick.
That sounds like another Beach Boys fantasy compilation, Surf Madness.
Yeah.
Uh,
Honestly, kind of shocked Capital didn't sell an album called Surf Madness. Just put another
yeah,
picture of a girl's ass and a bikini on it, and you get to
seriously. And then you just put like Dick Dale and Beach Boys and Jan and Dean and just yeah. All right, so up next we have Papa Mau Mau. This is another very kind of quirky vocal from Mike, Brian as well. This has never been one of my favorite covers that the band did. I do prefer the party version. I think it works better as kind of like an acoustic sing-along track than it does live. Yeah, I don't really have too much to say about this one. I do think it's a fun song, but only in small doses can I take it because it does start to get a little bit annoying pretty quickly. So it's okay, but it's not one of my favorites.
Yeah, I agree. I think the novelty songs are starting to wear a bit thin here for me by now. This is
Mm-hmm.
my least favorite of the bunch, but yeah, I think it definitely works better on Party. Not my favorite on Party either, though.
Yep.
I think besides Mike's like pretty high energy vocal, I think the rest is kind of dull. I feel
Mhm.
like if they were allowed to crank their guitars a little bit more, it'd sound a lot cooler if it was a bit faster paced. But besides Mike's pretty at your face vocal, there's not really much to write home about with the cover.
For me, this is actually probably my favorite song on the album.
Oh,
Uh,
well,
I just think it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed watching the Beach Boys Lost concert movie too, that shows them performing in the same year of 64. And to me, that Papa Umamau performance on there is the highlight of that little concert movie, which is sort of like the cousin to this album, more or less. Um, but yeah, I just think it's a really, really fun number, and I love the intensity that the band plays the instruments, and I just love Brian's Mike does the little doo-wop Papa Uma Mama Mama part, but the actual like lead vocal of the melody of the song that Brian does, I think Brian's singing is just so infectious, and you can just tell that they're having such a ball performing it. So I really like, it's fun to hear Brian kind of do more of a raspy thing. There's really not too many instances in the 60s of Brian Wilson doing that kind of vocal. Most of his vocals were so smooth. So it's fun to hear Brian just let loose and rock out a little bit vocally.
Yeah, I think like the novelty aspect of it is definitely kind of fun. Like, yeah, the fact that Brian's like singing in a weird voice too. And I think having that visual probably would make me enjoy it more too, Nate. But yeah, just listening to it on here, like kind of what Matt said, I feel like the novelty tracks are starting to wear a little bit thin here, where it's like, let's start doing some more like serious songs. So, but
Yeah.
let's kind of capture the fun vibe of their concerts, which I can appreciate. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, because you have to keep in mind like how we were talking about the Sacramento release too. Like when the Beach Boys actually played these shows, all these novelty songs were sprinkled in amongst all of the songs that Brian and Mike had written. But in this case, since they were trying to release an album of mostly new material, we're sort of left with all the novelty songs back to back to back, which has a different effect than how it was in person, I'm sure.
right.
How long were their concerts usually back then, Nate? Like what, 45 minutes? I know concerts back then weren't like usually super long.
No
Yeah, I'd
shit.
say probably if that.
Yeah.
Well,
But
they
it also probably depended. Like I think, like I mentioned, how they played like high school dances and sock hops and things like that. Like I can imagine that they were probably really demanding shows where they were probably playing as much as like 4 or 5 hours of just being like the band at a party, more or less, for kids.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
then there were probably appearances they did where maybe they only played 2 or 3 songs.
Yeah.
So it
They're like
probably greatly varied. But I imagine that they did have some really long nights of just playing for hours and hours on end.
they're like
And
a Star Wars Cantina band. If you play Lego Star Wars, I do
Yeah.
Yeah.
for like hours on a loop.
Imagine being like someone looking back and being like, "Oh yeah, the Beach Boys played at my high school dance."
Yeah,
Because they did,
that would be.
dozens of shows, when they were just getting going.
I mean, you hear that a lot sometimes. Like people are like, "Oh, I knew this person when they were in high school. I knew that person before they were famous. I saw this band when they were, It's always kind of cool."
Yeah.
But yeah, I know. I remember reading that the Beatles at Shea Stadium, 30 minutes. That's all they played. That's how long the shows were back then, which is it's crazy to think about nowadays. You would
yeah,
never ever see a concert for 30 minutes of like the headliner.
you'd want your money back nowadays. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So up next we have The Wanderer. I think this is a really fun cover, really fun performance. And it's one of the highlights of the album for me. I really love Dennis's vocal on this. I think it's very fitting that they had him sing this, like given his lifestyle and kind of like his role as the band's like sex symbol at the time. I also think it's cool that Brian plays drums on this. I think Al's on bass as well. But yeah, I think this is a really fun performance. I enjoy it quite a bit, and it's one that I do come back to from the album. So,
Yep. I agree with that. I think Dennis sings it well, very earnest vocal.
mhm.
Fitting, and it's kind of nice that he gets like a little opportunity to shine on the vocals because obviously usually he was stuck behind those drums.
Yeah.
Know that this is one that the girls went nuts over
You can hear it on the album. Yeah.
because the sex symbol finally gets a chance to step up to the mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love Dennis's vocal on this one. I kind of wish that he did a version of it for Party.
Mm.
Mm.
I do
Especially-
love his cover of "You Got to Hide Your Love Away," though. I think he does.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but I really wish he did like an acoustic, or he didn't do the acoustic guitar, but I wish they did like an acoustic version with him on it for Party because I feel like it would have worked better there. But it's one of those things like besides Dennis's awesome vocal, I mean, there isn't really much to write home about in terms of it just being like a fantastic cover for the full band. But it's solid. I enjoy it.
Yeah, a great Dennis lead. And it's interesting to note too that you have Brian playing the drums, that when Dennis would come out to the front to sing these songs, that Brian would put the bass down and he would go back and cover the drums for Dennis. So that would be a really cool sight. I wish they had, like videos of that we could see today. And it's funny, I'm friendly with a Beach Boys tribute band, and they started performing this song as part of their set list because they said that so many of the older fans that would come to their shows would request this song because they would remember the Beach Boys performing it back in the day when they were going to see the Beach Boys originally. So they would request this song thinking it was a Beach Boys song. And after so many requests, they eventually just threw it in the set list permanently.
Mhm.
So yeah, clearly Dennis coming out to the front and singing that left an impression on a lot of people.
So up next we have Hawaii. As you guys know, this isn't my favorite song, but I do think it's a good performance. I think Brian's falsetto on this one during the chorus is a little less whiny, grating sounding to me, so I probably maybe prefer it a little bit. And the performance also feels a bit more energetic as well. But yeah, overall, it's not something that I'm going to come back to. It's not the song that I'm that crazy about, but that said, I do think it's a decent performance of it. So.
Yeah, I think it's a solid rendition. It's got a lot of energy. I would say it sounds like it's in a lower key, at least compared to like the version that either that or this falsetto is just less whiny compared to the version on Surfer Girl. Because I know that, admittedly, I do like the song, but I think you have a point. The falsetto is a bit on the grating side, but here that definitely is mellowed out a bit. But yeah, it's a fun rendition of the song.
Yeah, I think this one is at least Brian's falsetto on it sounds very much like it was in the concert because I don't think Brian would ever do that kind of falsetto in the studio and let himself get away with it. It sounds very earnest, but it does not sound as like
On point.
clean, not as clean as you usually do. So I think that one it does sound pretty good. I do like Mike's vocal on it. Another one that just I think this one just sounds very much like it's in concert, and that's probably why it's one of my favorites from the album. But that being said, I'm always going to prefer the studio version. I don't think they changed enough of it to make it like different or it's not like Concert 73 where like this there's completely new arrangements that makes me return to them.
Yeah, to me this one is interesting because like the main arrangement difference is that in the studio version, you had the drum kit playing like the most incredibly simple, just two and the four with the snare. And then you had Hal Blaine doing the sort of Hawaiian percussion that was the main driving percussive force of the studio version. And instead on this one, you have just some crazy drumming from Dennis bashing the cymbals again and playing real hard and fast. But other than that, it's like you guys said, just it's great, but not that different or not that memorable compared to the studio version. And I think you guys are right. They normally play this one in G live, but the studio version's in A flat, so it does sound a little less shrill from them taking it down a little bit.
All right, so after this, we go back to another cover, Graduation Day, which was originally by the Four Freshmen. I think the performance on concert is decent. I definitely do prefer the studio version that's included on the Made in California box set that the Beach Boys did. I think that that's a really great and moving performance. I think the vocals on that version are incredible. On this one, I think the vocals are solid, but I think it's just okay. And I'm not really sure what happens during the bridge. I think Brian or Carl are laughing, and then somebody starts like slurping into the microphone. I don't really know what that's about, but I could probably do without that. But yeah, I think it's an okay performance. But in terms of this song, I definitely prefer the studio version from the Made in California box set. So
Yeah, definitely better in the studio. But I do kind of like it's a little corny, but like at the beginning when Mike is like, we dedicate this song to everyone who's graduated grade school and middle school and high school.
oh yeah,
It's a nice gesture, albeit a little cringy, but not the worst thing I've ever seen said at a concert by any stretch of the means. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's better. It's better in the studio. I don't know if this song really translates well to a live setting like that. Not saying you can't sing it live, but in a live session where everybody's screaming, I don't know.
yeah, Riley.
Yeah, I do much prefer the studio version to this one. I do like that you have that like minute and a half of just like them rambling and like prepping for the song. I feel like that does add to the concert aesthetic. But besides that, man, it's just like not as exciting and not as I don't think it's really performed as well as the studio version. It's
Yep,
just
yep.
it's kind of there for Brian to put out the Four Freshmen to his audience in the 60s.
I do think that there is something very poignant about the Beach Boys performing this song at this time because it was real to them. Like I think at one of these shows, it was actually Carl's 16th birthday. So they were at the age of either still being in school or just graduating or just graduated. But nonetheless, it's the sentiment was real for them at the time. And I think some of that emotion carries through the recording. And I'm always touched when I listen to it.
All right, so following this, we have I Get Around. Unfortunately, this recording, it's kind of like fun, where it really just sounds like it's the studio backing track. I listened to the Sacramento recordings from the 64 compilation, and they don't sound near as tight as this performance. That said, I do wish they had used like an actual recording of this because I do think the band did a decent job of this song live. And it had like that live energy, which I really like. But yeah, this version, it really sounds kind of like just the studio version with some overdubbed like crowd noise. So doesn't do a whole lot for me. But in the context of the album, I guess it's okay.
You hit the nail on the head. I will say I really like the version they did on Ed Sullivan, and because that was live, and I do like the version that they did. They did in the Tammy show, right? I think they did.
Hmm.
Is that the one where Dennis like breaks the drumstick halfway through?
Yeah,
Yes, that
yeah.
version is really good too on from the Tammy show. But this one is like I think you said it best, Jake.
Yeah, I kind of agree with all of you guys. I feel like they've done this song live a bunch of times and it sounds great. I don't know why they honestly just didn't take the soundboard from Ed Sullivan or something and just like
Yeah.
paste it in there. 'Cause they easily could have done that and it would have been better than the version we got on here. It's just a stripped down backing track. You can tell by a lot of the instruments because that track backing track in the studio version is like overdubbed to hell. So it's just like the rhythm section, like Nate said, and I really noticed that on this one when I listened, with just like a half-assed vocal over it, and it's just here you go, live version. But they've done it live, and it sounds fantastic. So I don't know why they didn't just like steal from one of those sources because they easily could have.
Yep.
I know that there were copyright issues with the Tammy show performance because for many, many years, I don't know if that was Murray or something, like you could not find the Beach Boys version from that at all. I remember that Shout Factory made a big song and dance when they put their version out. It's like, oh, it's finally fully restored. You finally get the Beach Boys back. Do you know what happened with that, Nate? Like why it was pulled from the Tammy show for so many years?
No.
No. I think I remember reading it was something that it was pulled from the Tammy show for many years.
Oh, interesting. Um, yeah, I mean, I agree with you guys that this version of the song is unremarkable if you listen to it just sort of isolated. But as part of the experience of listening to this album, I think it works and it's a satisfactory moment when you finally get to it because after hearing a lot of the covers or instrumentals, it's nice to hear one of the band's big hits, and it sort of serves. I think it's supposed to serve sort of as like maybe like the climax of the experience of listening to the album because you get all these songs and you work your way up to their big hit. So in the context of listening to the album, it works.
Mhm.
But yeah, it would be weird to listen to this one just on its own.
I looked it up. So it says that they usually cut the Beach Boys out of most versions of the Tammy show because there was a copyright dispute by the request of someone in their management that said just take it out.
That's weird. They were like one of the big draws of the show.
Yeah, I think it's usually them, and I think I know a lot of people really like James Brown in the Tammy show as well too. Then I read that Mick Jagger was kind of like the Rolling Stones didn't play as good as they usually did because they had to go right after James Brown.
He was too thick and shit to go after James Brown.
I guess so. I mean, James Brown is James freaking Brown, That man was amazing.
All right, so concert closes with the Beach Boys covering Johnny Be Good. In my opinion, this is just like the definition of just an okay cover. Like it's fine. I think it's a good performance, but I definitely do prefer the original from Chuck Berry. Also hearing the Beach Boys play that opening riff just makes me want to hear Fun, Fun, Fun again, which usually close their concert. So it's kind of interesting that here it opens their concert and then they close with Johnny Be Good. I almost feel like it would make more sense to flip flop those two, but yeah, I think it's a decent performance, but another one that like I don't really have any interest in listening to outside the context of the album. So
Kind of a weird choice to sing this. I mean, I know they're all big on Chuck Berry, but like this is, this similar riff to Fun, Fun, Fun.
yeah.
Like deja vu, right?
Yeah, maybe they were like paying tribute, like to their one of their influences.
That's what they did on that one song too. But yeah, I agree with you. It's fine. It's not something I would come back to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what the Beach Boys did all the way back then and still do today, and it's like two sides to the coin, is they do really like study and recognize what songs audiences will respond to, what's most likely to get people up and dancing and having a good time. And so the plus side of that is that you'll get to hear a lot of these old rock and roll standards like Come Go With Me or Johnny Be Good or rock and roll music or Why Do Fools Fall in Love and crowd pleasers. But the flip side of that coin that sometimes bums people like us out is you get to miss out on maybe some deeper cuts or some ballads. So yeah, it is an interesting choice, but like you guys alluded to, that the Beach Boys, they've loved rock and roll, and it's really easy to typecast them as being just four freshmen or Phil Spector worshipers, but they loved all that 1950s R&B and rock and roll stuff. So it's great to hear them pay tribute to it. And I really like hearing Mike and Brian sing in unison. A lot of times you hear Brian and Mike harmonizing or you hear them switching off, but it's not often that you hear them both singing the same part together. And I think they actually do have a really cool blend, even when they're just singing in unison. So I think it's cool to hear that.
Mm-hmm. Riley, you want to give your thoughts real quick?
Yeah, Nate, you cut me off, man.
Oh, I didn't even realize, my bad.
You're good. Um, yeah, I do think that I mean, Carl, we know, was a huge fan of Chuck Berry. I mean, he absolutely influenced his style, so I think it's awesome that he gets a chance to play it. But I think that they almost tried too hard with the cover of it. I think that if they just kind of let loose a little bit and made it a little bit more of a looser arrangement, it would have sounded good. This is like one of this. I'm like pretty like I guess critical of this because this is one of my like favorite songs of all time. When I saw it in Back to the Future, that's what made me want to play guitar for the first time. So like this is like one of my favorite songs of all time, and it just kind of sounds a bit dull to me, but I do enjoy it a little bit. I think that it's cool to hear Carl kind of ripping on the guitar, but besides that cool fun fact of Mike Love and Brian Wilson singing in unison, I don't think the lead vocals were particularly exciting compared to what it could have been.
Makes
It
me
definitely sounds very white. It's not like
Yeah.
Elvis where you might be fooled that it was black. You definitely know it's white guys singing this.
That's a
Yeah.
good. Now you just made me want to watch Back to the Future, Riley. It's been
Dude,
years.
that exact scene of Marty McFly doing that opening riff is the reason I play guitar today. No exaggeration.
That is genuinely, I think, one of the best written screenplays ever.
Hey, they will never. The Beach Boys version will never beat the Marty McFly and the Starlighters version.
All right, so now we will jump forward in history, about 10 years to 1973, to the next Beach Boys concert album we're going to be talking about, which is In Concert. So this album was released at a very different period in the band's history. Blondie Chaplin and Ricky Pittar had joined the band by this point, providing vocals and guitar, and drums, obviously, with Ricky Pittar. Brian Wilson had long been off the stage by this point. And the touring band as a whole was like really at like their tightest at this point in terms of a live act. They sounded fantastic. In terms of their like popularity at this point, they hadn't yet had like that massive resurgence that they had with like 15 Big Ones where they were touring stadiums, but they were starting to gain more popularity based on the reputation that they had as a great live band, as well as the fact that like this was kind of around the time when Americans started kind of craving nostalgia with American Graffiti coming out around this time. And obviously the following year, Endless Summer would be a massive #1 hit. So Nate, do you kind of want to get into some of the history and background behind the Beach Boys in Concert album from 1973?
Yeah, there's not too much to chew on with this one, other than they did record it over many, many different shows,
Mm-hmm.
and you can actually see the different venues that they played at listed. If you look at the album's Wikipedia page, it's interesting to see all
Mm-hmm.
the different shows that this is pulled from. And really, I think it was just to generate some dough for Brother and for, I believe this was on Warner. And
Yeah.
so, you know, that is that. But at the same time, you can really see and hear that Carl took a lot of pride with the arrangements and with the production. And, I've said many, many times before that if I had to pick a Desert Island Beach Boys album, I would not be disappointed if this was what I ended up with. I think it's just a really, really stellar pairing of their hits and some of their more experimental stuff. And it's just a great, great combination of songs. Originally, they tried to do a one album version, and it originally actually even had the Jumpin' Jack Flash recording on there. Um, but the label rejected it. They wanted more hits. And so they made it a full double album and included a lot more surf songs. And that's how we got the album that came out in 73.
Matt, Nate, or Matt and Riley, you guys have any general thoughts you wanted to share on this album?
First, I want to say the Beach Boys were not too chicken shit to do Jumpin' Jack Flash. But as I've said in the beginning, I'm really not the biggest live album listener, but listening to this again for maybe the second or third time, really, really a great listen. It's really cool to hear like a lot of these songs with new arrangements, with new like flourishes add to them, with different people singing lead on them. I This is like my favorite era of like the live band. I think this is when the live band was probably at like arguably their best.
Yep.
A lot of
Yep.
diversity in the band, lots of different styles coming in. The addition of Blondie and Ricky is awesome. And I really think listening to this kind of almost makes me sad in a way because it's like, what could else they have done? You know, like Endless Summer was the ultimate double-edged sword for this band because
Mhm.
it's like, yes, they were back on the charts again, they're popular again, but it kind of stifled, you know, that creative spark they had in the early 70s. But this is a great document, great album.
Yeah,
Well,
dude, this is up there as one of my favorite live albums of all time. If I had to make a list, this would probably be in the top three. Uh, Up there with Oasis live at Knebworth. Pink Floyd's version, the live version of The Wall is pretty damn good, but
It's
I
a
think
lot.
that this is awesome because not only are you getting the greatest hits, but you're getting the greatest hits as they were in 1973 when the live band was at its peak. Like it's pretty weird to think that not Pink Floyd, the Beatles, not the Beatles, the Beach Boys, were up there as one of the greatest live acts of all time because like back in the 60s, as we saw, like they were cool, but they're kind of just boring compared to like a lot of what they're able to do in the studio. And then you see this live band doing this bluesy version of "Help Me, Rhonda," and it's like honestly one of the coolest performances I've ever heard. You have like band members improvising over the chord progression. Like you have extended jams, you have like heavy guitars. Um, and like it sounds crazy. Like this is kind of I don't want even to say like a proggy version of the Beach Boys. This is like if the Beach Boys in the Led Zeppelin covered the Beach Boys, but instead of it being Led Zeppelin, it's just actually just the Beach Boys. I think it's really cool. I think it's benefited that they have not only the addition of Ricky and Blondie, you have Ed Carter helping out on guitar and bass, and he's a fantastic musician. You have Billy Hinchy killing it on the keys.
mhm.
You have Mike Kowalski, he's kind of just there. Um,
Carly Munoz, I think, on key.
you know, you have such this like expanded live band and they have fantastic chemistry. And it's just crazy to think that like not even like 8, 9 years ago, this was the band doing like Surfing USA. It's crazy that they went from arguably one of the worst live acts of all time in like 62 to one of the greatest live acts you could ever see. I think it's nuts. And I'm glad that we have some sort of representation of it and that there's very little studio interference on this album.
Mhm.
A lot of it's just live recorded. Like I'll often return to a lot of these songs more than the studio versions themselves.
Yeah, same here. Some of these songs on here, which I'll mention them as we go along through the track list, but I actually come back to them more just because like I love the arrangements and some of them are such high energy. And yeah, like the appeal of this album for me, it's such a cool time capsule of like the period when really this band was really at their peak as a live act. And like you mentioned, so many great musicians on stage with them. And I love the variety too. You have like the more modern contemporary hits at the time, like songs like The Traitor, Leaving This Town, stuff from Holland. But then you also have like the string of hits as well. And man, the live band just absolutely rocks out on those hits. I can see why like the crowd went nuts when they would play like Fun, Fun, Fun and Surfing USA because man, like they played the hell out of those. So, all right. So do we want to get into the track list for Beach Boys in concert? All right. So the album opens with Sail on Sailor, which was a recent, I guess, kind of like mini hit for them. It got a little bit of radio airplay. I think this is a really great performance. Really kind of like introduces the album right away. Shows how tight the band live act is. Great vocals from Blondie. And yeah, not too much else to say about it, honestly. I enjoy it a lot. It's definitely one of those highlights of the album for me. So.
Yeah, I just want to also add that I love the keyboard sound that's going on in there. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of, well, and I kind of like that they started off with a new song, just because like I think that this is a really good, it's a good representation of kind of like where they were going at that point in time. I think it's like, wasn't there like some kind of ad that was like the Beach Boys have changed almost as much as you
Yeah,
have,
more than you have. Yeah, yeah.
or whatever. I think this is a great way to show that it's like, you know, they're still the Beach Boys that you knew 10 years ago, but they're not exactly the same as they were 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a great way to show that off. Great opener.
Yeah, man, I love this one. I think I prefer the studio version a little bit just because it's
Yeah,
like pretty
me too.
iconic in the studio, but like I think this is a great way to start it off. I love that we have that perfect balance between what was then new material and what wasn't. Because honestly, as much as I say like if I was to show like a Beach Boy or a new Beach Boys fan like where to start, you could probably say Endless Summer, and I probably would say Endless Summer, but not too long after I'd honestly just show them this album because it shows them what they could have been, and it probably opens up the listener's mind like, okay, this could be the Beach Boys. They could actually do shit like this,
Yeah.
and I'm absolutely rocking. And I showed some of my friends like some of the songs from this album. I don't know if I showed them Sail on Sailor in particular, but like he's like this heavy rock guy. His favorite band is Alice in Chains. I don't know why, but it's whatever. And I showed him this. He's like, "This is not the Beach Boys." Uh, Sail on Sailor is probably the perfect way to encapsulate because you still have like that, I guess, like beachy ocean theme, but like it's totally new and it's hard rocking. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, I think also too, like the song that I think if you were to play to somebody and ask them what band this is and you'd be there for a while is a Here She Comes. I think you'd be there a very long time before you got to the Beach Boys.
Yeah, I don't have a heck of a lot to add on top of what you guys uh said so brilliantly. Um, I would just say that it shows how greatly implemented Blondie and Ricky were into the band, because they don't really stick out. It's not too noticeable. Obviously, the lead vocal sound is different, but
Yep.
it's still, like you guys said, very much like a Beach Boys sound, and they're really just so cohesive as a unit. And it just shows that Blondie and Ricky and the other new guys that you all mentioned just gelled right in, and they were just playing together so well. So I really dig this version, and it's cool to hear all the added elements like the couple guitars and the percussion. And it's just it is the studio version is really unique in how groovy and tight it is, but this
Mm.
version is a lot more lively and just sort of boisterous. So it is a great listen.
Yeah, and this song really fits Blondie's voice so well too. I think it was a great choice to have him sing it. Like I know Billy Hinchy and Carl sang lead on this a little bit later on after Blondie had left, but like he definitely sings it the best of everyone in my opinion. So
And
great choice.
originally it was supposed to be Dennis too, and then,
Right, he didn't. Right, or he went.
yeah,
So
but it
I
worked
think
out
Dennis,
well for Blondie, didn't it?
I think Dennis could have done it well, but Blondie, it suits Blondie like a
yeah,
glove.
Yeah,
yeah.
it was meant to be.
All right, so the next track in the album is Sloop John B, which I guess is kind of like technically the first oldie, even though it's more like a mid '60s Beach Boy song, not really like a surf song. I love this performance a lot. It's so high energy. I think that the song works really great at like the faster tempo that they play it at. I love Carl and Mike's vocals. They think they do a great job, and also really awesome drumming from Ricky Pitar as well. I think it's Ricky on drums on this. Just really kick-ass drumming. And I have to say, I do come back to this recording more than I do the original studio version, just because I love the energy of this. Like the studio version, I enjoy it in the context of Pet Sounds, but if you ask me which version of Sloop John B I want to just hear by itself, I choose this one just because I love how high energy and rocking it is. So one of my favorite recordings from the album for sure.
Yeah, I agree. You hit the nail on the head. Lot great energy. The harmonies sound really tight. The band is really tight. Carl sounds great. Mike's great. Yeah, I think it works better at this tempo because I think on Pet Sounds it's not bad, but it's a little bit more bogged down, I think, compared to this one.
Yeah.
It's just kind of cool to hear these arrangements just because like I've often said I think I over listen to Pet Sounds, and so hearing this is like a breath of fresh air because I'm not as familiar with this version. But yeah, I really, really like it a lot.
7 years later, and Al Jardine still doesn't get a lead vocal on Sloop John B. I think that's Carl definitely brings the energy in this one. He's singing the fuck out of this song. Um, Although I still really like that studio version just for the production and arrangement touches, but doesn't mean I like this one any less. I think it's fantastic, and I didn't. It's one of those like times where I Sloop John B in concert is like a mid-tempo song. They can't possibly make it hard rocking, and here they are. It's fantastic. I love it. I don't prefer it to the studio version, but I enjoy the hell out of it. I didn't think that the Beach Boys could take a song like Sloop John B, rearrange it one time, and then like 7 years later just rearrange it again. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this album, what I particularly like about it is I think they in this era did a really amazing job of knowing how to simultaneously play faithfully and invent new things along the way on the spot. A great marriage of those two things, because a lot of the original parts from the Pet Sounds arrangement, the different interlocking like 12 string melodies, they're still there, but everything just has this new spice and this new just energy to it. It's a big barrel of energy for sure. And Carl did a great job on the vocal.
All right, so up next we have The Traitor, which is the second song from Holland that's featured on the album. This one, I think it's a solid performance, and I think Carl sounds great on it, as he always does. But I do have to say, I strongly prefer the original version from Holland for this one. On the original, I just really love the backing track, like the instrumental arrangement, and I also love Brian and Marilyn's backing vocals, which obviously aren't included here. I think as a live song, I performed live. I think they couldn't do it much better than they did. But in terms of like coming back to this one, I really only listened to it in the context of the album. I definitely prefer the Holland version. So, what do you guys think of The Traitor?
Yeah, I think it's a nice rendition. Probably not as good as the studio version, but it's a good rendition. Carl sounds great. I'm glad it made it onto the album too, because I do love The Traitor. It's one of my favorites on Holland, and it's nice to hear it performed live here. But yeah,
It's a good rendition, but I honestly think it's a bit disappointing considering the other renditions that they've done on the album.
I agree. I agree.
Um, Although, I mean, while I consider myself a musician, I'm no expert musician, so I don't suppose like what they could have done to change it to make it a bit better or a bit high energy or concert. But for like a solid mid-tempo song, I think they did the best they could. But compared to the other like things that they've done with some of their other classics, it's a bit disappointing. But like you're also like comparing like a great song with some of the best like live versions they've ever done. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually a big fan of this one.
Mm.
I actually think I listened to this one more than the Holland version. I think it just, they're not playing it radically faster, but they're playing it a bit faster here. And I think this song just benefits from being played a little bit faster. I think like the Holland version sometimes feels a little bit like sleepy with the tempo changes and stuff, but this one's just a little bit more driving. So for that reason, I do really enjoy this version.
Yeah, for me, I just think it's like I think the production on the Holland version is what puts it over this one. And I know this is a song I believe they actually kept in the set list for quite a while. Like I think it was still in there as of like 1975, and then they finally pulled it. But yeah, I kind of agree with what Riley said. I just feel like they could have done it a little bit better, maybe like add some more backing vocals like they did in the original studio version. But all in all, it's a solid performance. So. All right, so following this, we have the second track from Pet Sounds that's included on the album, You Still Believe in Me. I think this is an amazing performance. Really great lead vocal from Al. I really like the arrangement on this one as well, like with the cool like keyboard effects and the guitar. I think all the guys sound really great, especially during the outro, like the I Want to Cry section at the end. Just really beautiful vocals. So definitely this is Al's first moment to really shine on the album and really shows what a versatile vocalist he was, covering Brian's parts on this song. So love this one a lot.
yeah, it's a great cover by Al. He does a great job with the vocal. What is creating that sound in the beginning? Is that a guitar?
Justin went into it when we did the Holland episode. He talked a little bit about it.
I've always thought it was maybe a 12-string guitar or
Oh,
two and a synthesizer as well.
Oh, well, whatever it is, I love the sound of it. I know that in the original, if I'm not mistaken, the original studio version wasn't it like they were playing the piano and they were like plucking like the strings of the piano inside while playing the keys?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they did a really nice job of kind of replicating that to the best of their ability on stage. I know you really can't replicate that entirely on stage, but I think it's also kind of cool to hear some of the Pet Sounds material being played live, just because
yeah.
I know that there was a hesitation at the beginning to play that stuff live just because they felt they really couldn't pull it off. So it's really cool to kind of hear it. And honestly, like some of it I think is actually kind of more interesting on the stage than it is listening to just Pet Sounds over and over again.
Um, I don't know. It kind of sounds like a guitar to me. I don't know if chorus pedals were around yet, but it sounds like it could have be like a guitar with like a slight chorus on it. I don't know. But I do really like the opening. I think the guitar, if it is a guitar, the guitar tone is absolutely beautiful. I think Al gives a great vocal. It's not a song I would expect him to sing. I feel like it kind of needs a tender vocal, but I think Al surprised me on that one and surpassed my expectations. It sounds fantastic. Um, Yes, one of those songs you don't expect to hear live, and then they do it, and it just kind of blows your mind. I think it's really cool. It definitely shifts the tone in the concert. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Ma-
think this one, what makes this, clearly Al's very emotional performance is a highlight for sure. But something that makes this one stand out to me is the sort of more grooving, prominent percussion going on. I think on the original Pet Sounds version, Hal Blaine was preoccupied playing the bicycle horn instead of the drums. So on this version, you actually have a drum beat and you have some various kind of bongos and congas and maracas and things like that, just adding a really constant sort of flow of percussion. And I think it's just really interesting because a lot of the Pet Sound stuff lacks like a beat, it's kind of classical in that way. So to hear a lot of these songs given sort of like a standard pop rock kind of groove is really interesting and it really helps the songs translate well to a performance. So I think it's a cool groovy version, very like 70s take on something that originally was very mid 60s, now sounds very 70s with this performance.
Yeah, I almost feel like somebody, like listening to Pet Sounds, it's kind of a grower for a lot of people. Like it takes time to grow on you. It definitely did for me. I feel like if like, those original versions don't click with someone right away, I'd almost want to show them some of these like live versions of like Caroline No and You Still Believe in Me on this album, just because like you said, like it makes them a little more, I guess, accessible a little bit. The fact that they have
Yeah,
a beat, like you said. So that's honestly, I think that would be a good idea to somebody that maybe is struggling with Pet Sounds to show them these versions. All right, so up next we have California Girls, which is obviously like a Beach Boys concert staple. Honestly, not too much to say about this one. I think it's a great performance. I wouldn't say it's my favorite performance of California Girls. I come back to the live at Knebworth version more than this one. That's probably my preferred live version, but I think it's a good performance. I think Mike does a great lead, and the band sounds really tight as well. So,
Yep, I agree. Great performance. Everything you said. I also like how the intro sounds in this one too.
yeah, it's really cool. They like stretch it out. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely beats the David Lee Roth version, but not the studio one. Uh, I love the stretched out intro. I love Mike's like really like cool vocal. I think he does a great job with it. I think his voice evolved really well into the early 70s, and he's giving a good rock and roll performance. But yeah, I think California Girls is one of those songs that you can't really beat the studio version. That's just how perfectly arranged it was. Can never really pull it off, but it is a great concert staple, and I think they're absolutely killing it with this one.
yeah. I mean, it's like perfection, but there are like some more like outstanding or memorable moments on the album that sort of overshadow it. Um, but yeah, like Riley said, Mike gives like a really cool, confident lead, and sort of like what Jake said, I think the best was yet to come in terms of California Girls on stage. Like they would really get it super dialed in by like Knebworth with the dramatic intro. And I think this was the beginning of the evolution of them taking it there. You can sort of see those seeds planted with this version. So yeah, it's cool.
All right, so next up we have another 60s Beach Boys song, Darlin'. This is honestly one of the highlights of the album for me. It's probably the track I come back to the most. I've always loved hearing live versions of this song, but this recording is probably my favorite of them all. I think Carl sounds fantastic on this. Just amazing lead vocals from him. The band sounds super tight as well. I love the backing vocals from the guys and great drumming from Ricky Pitar as well. And yeah, I honestly come back to this version more than the original Wild Honey version. As much as I love that version, this song works so well live. And yeah, I love this performance. It's definitely one of my favorite Beach Boys live recordings ever. So, what do you guys think of Darlin'?
Yeah. It has great energy. Carl sounds great. I think that this song I think is one of those songs that does always sound a bit better live just because the energy that's injected to it. Some of Wild Honey, I think Wild Honey is a great album, but I do think that some of the mixing kind of lets that album down, at least the original mono mix. And I think
Yeah,
this
I always look at the Sunshine Tomorrow mixes.
Yeah, that's the stereo remix. Yeah, because the original mono mix is a bit on the muddy side.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But I also wanted to shout out the 80 version that was done on DC. I really like that version too, but this
Mm.
is as well.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough call because I really do like that 60s studio version on Wild Honey. That's just that's like the how I first heard the song, and it's one of my favorite Beach Boys songs of all time. So it's really tough. But I do really like the energy on this one. Carl, per usual, killing it on the vocal. Very soulful, very fast pace. It just kind of, but I feel like with the live version, it feels like they go through it a little too fast. I don't know.
I
I'd have to keep listening to it.
I feel like the Knebworth version of this from 1980 is a little bit too fast, although I do really like it. Where like this one, I feel like the tempo is just right in terms of like giving it like a live performance. But I do want to say I do love the studio version as well. Like I love it just about as much. But like I just think the song works so well live that like I just love hearing it live. So
Yeah. Oh, it does rock. I love it. It's just I
yeah,
don't know. It's tough. One of my favorite songs of all time, and it's like
yeah.
it's weird hearing the live version almost.
Yeah, I agree that it benefits for sure. The song in general benefits from being performed live just because of the energy that the band always gives it. I
Hmm.
think with this version, I'm missing like the nice sort of thickly arranged horn section a little bit. I think they have some of those parts replicated, maybe a saxophone somewhere in there, but it's not quite the same as having that whole brass section blaring away. But yeah, for what you miss out with on the horns, you get extra from Carl with his singing and from the band's playing overall. So I dig it.
All right, up next we have Marcella, which was another kind of recent song for the band at the time. This was from Carl and the Passions from 1972. This is another one of the highlights of the album for me. I think this is a kick-ass live performance of the song. I think it really gives it kind of that rocking energy that I feel like it kind of lacks on the original Carl and the Passions version. I do still like that version and the production on it. I also do prefer the original slide guitar solo from the Carl and the Passions version, but in my opinion, this live performance really rocks and it kind of turns it into like that Rolling Stone style rocker that Brian envisioned it sounding like. So I really love it, and I think Carl's lead vocals are incredible as well, and I love the sound of the guitars as well. Such a rocking song. So, what do you guys think of their performance of Marcella?
Yep. Great energy. Vocals great. Love the guitar. Definitely how the song should sound. I mean, I like the original too, but I like it more at this tempo.
Yeah.
I think that what I really like about this album as a whole, it shows how hard they could rock at times. Because I do think I stumbled upon a Let's Talk Music thread.
Oh God.
Wasn't that bad, but I stumbled upon one of those the other day that someone was like comparing the Beach Boys to the Beatles. Someone's like, yeah, I like the Beach Boys fine, but they're too saccharine for me, so the Beatles all the way. So maybe this kind of like shatters that view a little bit.
They need to listen to Live Short and Bread.
Mhm.
This
Right.
this this kicks the original's ass, man. I love the original version. I
Yeah.
love Carl and the Passions as an album. And I think Marcelo is great on that album, but when you hear this version, you just never go back to that one ever again. The opening guitar, like, it's so fucking cool, man. This song just shreds. It absolutely shreds. It sounds like a Rolling Stones song. Like this is
Yeah.
what Brian meant when he wanted it to sound like a Rolling Stones song. Because
Yeah.
holy shit, it does.
Yeah, I totally agree that this is one of my all-time favorite songs. I think it was like my top replay song for quite a few years in a row.
Wow.
Um, and yeah, as I've really grown to appreciate the studio version so much, especially thanks to hearing the isolated backing track on the Sailor box set a few years ago. But like Riley said, like to me, the key to appreciating this song as one of my favorite songs came through listening to this version. It made me appreciate the studio version better. Because the studio version, it's brilliant, but the mix is kind of very cluttered and it's a bit hard to hear all the different elements that the band is playing. And with this version, you can really clearly hear the guitar riffs and all the different things that are going on. So it just made me realize what a insane composition it is. And yeah, so I adore it 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I mean, I do, like I said, I do like kind of like the funky groove of the original version from Carl and the Passions, and like I said too, the slide guitar solo I really love. It's very like George Harrison sounding, so I always thought that that was very cool. But yeah, this live version just ups the energy so much, and it's the one I do come back to the most of all the versions of this song. So, all right, so up next we have yet another Pet Sounds song, Caroline No. And for me, this is another standout performance on the album. I absolutely love it. Carl's vocals are so beautiful. His vocal really sells kind of like the melancholic lyrics of the song. Very emotive performance. I really like the stripped back arrangement as well with the guitar, the keyboard, and the flute. And yeah, I just think it's a fantastic performance, and I'm glad that this recording exists in such a high quality because I love it and I come back to it a lot. So
Yeah, I agree. I think Carl does a great job singing it. Very moving piece. And another one that's nice to hear live, just because I know that, like I said, there wasn't too much of this being performed when it came out. So it's nice that they kind of went back and dug into a fan favorite and are giving it the
yeah,
live.
Dude, I love the keyboard on this one. It really emphasizes like it's weird. They kind of like made it into a little bit of a jam. I didn't really expect Caroline No to be that. I'm also glad that you got a lot of the Pet Sounds representation on this one because I feel like it didn't really have, I mean, it had the critical like accolades to it, but it didn't really have that like popular or popular like focus yet. I mean, it didn't really hit that until like later on and like the Brian's back kind of thing, and people kind of noticed him as like a genius, whatever. Um, but I love this version. I love Carl's vocal. I can imagine like the lights going down and them doing this. This is like, oddly enough, this is one of the ballads they chose, and I'm glad they chose this one. I'm glad they're kind of doing that more artsy stuff.
So it just sort of popped into my head as we were talking about how all these Pet Sounds songs are showcased on this album. I think a big reason for that is that the band wasn't making too much money off of their pre-65 material since that was still owned by Capitol, but they had just recently acquired the rights to Pet Sounds and issued it alongside Carl and the Passions. So they were definitely trying to still promote Pet Sounds and still get those songs out there as well, because they now, you know, were making a few more coins off of that album than their surf songs. Um, but yeah, it's what I really love about this is um I can't even remember if they say, I think they may say something about Brian that, that this is a little tribute to Brian, but even if they don't say that, I think it's very much felt. And it's just such a beautiful brotherly tribute from Carl and Dennis too to Brian, because this was a bit of a keyboard showcase for Dennis at the time. During this era, Dennis was doing a lot of sort of frontman work with Mike up at the front of the stage, but this was one of the songs that he would get behind the keyboards. So I think a lot of the sort of keyboard riffing and soloing you're hearing on this song is actually Dennis.
that's real. I didn't know that at all. That's really cool. It makes me appreciate it even more, honestly. Yeah, I think
It's
you're right.
definitely like a blend of several keyboardists, but Dennis is in there for sure.
I think you're right too about Carl. I think at the beginning he says something like, "This is a really beautiful ballad from the Pet Sounds album that Brian wrote," and he says it's one of my favorites. I think something along those lines.
Okay, I knew I wasn't losing it there.
Yeah. All right, so up next we have another Holland song, "Leaving This Town." Honestly, I kind of have similar thoughts about this one as I have about the version of The Traitor on this album. I like it, and I think Blondie and the band sounds really great. That said, though, I do strongly prefer the original studio recording from Holland. I will say, though, re-listening to this for the first time in a little bit, that proggy keyboard solo in the middle is pretty damn cool, and it has grown on me a ton. I'm glad it doesn't go on any longer than it does. I know Riley wishes it would go on for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I think it's a good length. I think it doesn't outstay its welcome for me. But yeah, I think it's a good performance. I do come back to the Holland version more, but this is a really cool performance as well. And it's one of the Beach Boys' most proggy sounding like live moments. So
I love the keyboard solo. That's the highlight of the song for me. And I wouldn't mind if it went on for like another 2 or 3 minutes. But yeah, I think it's a pretty solid performance. And definitely for me, the keyboard solo is the highlight of it. That's like them really kind of them embracing their progginess. And I think kind of, showing that they could measure up to the best of them that were performing live at the time.
Uh, I prefer this to the studio version. Dude, there are times where I'll just like skip ahead to the keyboard solo, man. I'll just go straight to it. As far as I know, that's Billy Hinchy doing it. Um, I know Billy Hinchy was the guy who did the keyboard solo on Help Me Rhonda, so I'm pretty sure it's him. But holy fuck, man, it's everything I could have wanted from this song. I just wish they stretched it out a little bit longer. But the entire like performance is awesome. I love Blondie's vocal. I think his vocal on here is much better than the one on the album. I think he's really singing this like a soulful lead. And as I've already mentioned, the keyboard solo. Yeah, this is probably one of the ones I return to the most. Probably number two because I already know what my number one is, but I'm not going to say it till we get to it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I do prefer this version. I think musically it just moves along a little better than the studio version. I always feel like the studio version you could have just had like a little more rhythm or a little more yeah, I guess I would just say motion to the playing. Like it feels a little static on the studio version, whereas this one's just kind of larger than life. And just as we were discussing it, for the first time, I sort of realized that this song, uh, in my mind, is almost like the sequel of That's Not Me, kind of like a similar theme going on there. And so, uh, yeah, it does sort of have some of that Pet Sounds emotion to the lyrics. So I like that.
All right. Following this, we have Heroes and Villains. This is another example of the band taking one of their like 60s songs and really upping the energy on it, kind of like what they did with Sloop John B. As much as I love their performance of Sloop John B on this album, I actually think that this one works even better live. Al really sings the hell out of this. I think it's one of his best ever live lead vocals. It really fits his voice really well. And the band as a whole just really rocks out on this one. Such a high energy performance. I will gladly admit that I do come back to this live version far more than I do the original version of this song, both like the Smile mix and the Smiley Smile version. I think this song really rocks, and I love it. I think it's a great performance.
Yeah, I think they do a great job with it. Like you said, Al sings the hell of it. It's very fun. A lot of energy. I think the problem with not really the problem, but I think the thing with Heroes and Villains, especially the version that most people have heard at this point in time, is like the Smile Smile version, which is a bit kind of underproduced and
Muddy a little bit.
very muddy. And I think that this kind of brings it back to life a bit. Um, I've never been the biggest fan of this song, but I really do enjoy this version.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. This was probably the lowest point of the album for me.
Really?
Whoa,
Damn.
Yeah.
whoa,
Wow.
So
wow.
yeah, me being like the
Oh,
big prog guy, it's like what the
man.
fuck. But if I'm gonna be honest with myself, I love Al's vocal. I think he's doing the best he can. I think that this is one of those songs that you can almost never do live unless you have like a 50-piece orchestra like Brian did when he did that with Smile 2004. um, because I really like the sections of this song. I love the perfect arrangements, the small refined parts that make up the entire like masterpiece of the song in the Smile and Smiley Smile versions. And I feel like that's really hard to replicate live. I think it's impressive that they played it live because it is a very hard song to pull off. But I'm always going to prefer the studio version. But that's also coming from the guy who prefers this to Good Vibrations. So it's one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. It's really hard to get it right. That's why I fucking hated the Pentatonics version. Fuck them.
Oh my God.
So I actually completely understand where Riley is coming from
Me too.
because Heroes and Villains is like the epitome of all the genius that Smile represents. However, with that said, to me, this is really like in my mind the definitive version of the song, and uh, I think Al's vocal is just stellar. But what I really like about it is, and again, I understand that this is a feature of Smile and not an issue, but it's actually by design meant to be this way. But the Smile version of this song is and Smiley's version, they're just so herky jerky.
Yep.
To use like a filmmaking term, it's almost like there are like stop edits or jump cuts between the different sections, and it's kind of jarring. And what I love about this version is you've got the different fills and little musical pickups and just the transitions between each section that make them blend seamlessly. And really, I just think Ricky's drumming is so powerful in this version. I love his fills, and it just the really loud drumming sort of helps carry the song forward. And so to me, this version is just so brilliant. And I love the little touches that Carl added that blend all the pieces together.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much why it works better for me too, is the fact that like, yeah, it isn't so herky jerky. Like there isn't this big break between the sections. It just kind of it gets quiet for like a second, you hear a couple of drum beats, and it goes right into the next part. It doesn't feel very. I will say too, I don't you can maybe confirm this, Nate. I don't know if maybe I'm just hearing things, but I feel like I can hear very low in the mix during the heroes and villains section, like the heroes and villains. Mike would do this thing around the time where he would go the
Yeah.
the heroes and villains. I'm so happy. I think that they mixed him out of this, for like they like really lowered his vocals so you don't hear that, because I've never cared for that. I don't know why they had him doing that during the performance. I think it's very like hokey. So I'm glad that they didn't include that.
Well, I think it's an homage to the fact that he did that on some of the tapes of the original Smile version.
Oh, okay.
Um, and but on the Smile version, I think all the guys were doing it, and it was like sort of like this deep sort of male choir, kind of tribal, almost more like tribal sound. And
Yeah.
then with the live version, when you just have one person doing it, in this case Mike, it sort of loses that like umph and power and like spooky sound. It just sounds silly, like you said. And even the Beach Boys did this song at the Royal Albert Hall in 2015 with Mike and Bruce's band. There's
Hmm.
like a clip of it on YouTube, and Mike was still doing that part after all these years.
Oh, are you serious? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. All right, so moving on to the next track, we have Funky Pretty, which again was another recent release from Holland. This is one of those ones where I used to strongly prefer the original version, but I will say that this performance has grown on me quite a bit over time, and now it isn't too far behind the studio version for me. Again, the band takes what's kind of a originally a mid-tempo song and really rocks out with it. I love how most of the guys sing different lead parts on this, and I also really love the guitar playing on it as well. I think that's kind of the main thing that this one has that the Holland version doesn't, is that really rocking guitar throughout it. I would still say I do prefer the Holland version for the production, but this live version is really great, and it is one that I do come back to now. So
Yeah, it's a really good cover. Like you said, it's got a lot of energy. It's like nice and high temp. It's nice. It got a good tempo, and I really like the keyboard sound on it too.
yeah.
I gotta be honest, man. I love this version far more than the album version. I think it just kicks its ass. It's a similar case to Marcella, where they're allowed to go more than they were in the studio, if that makes any sense. They're allowed to like stretch it out. I really love that little guitar intro that they did. I thought that was really freaking cool. Yeah, I just think it's a bit more high energy and has a lot more talk from the studio. I love the sound of the keyboard in the background too. I think it's really cool. It sounds like so like I don't know if it's phased or not. I don't know what it is, but it sounds really cool. I mean, Nate would all know all the right terms for this stuff, so probably he probably knows what I'm talking about.
Yeah, some great Moog synthesizer action on this one. Yeah, so I agree. To me, this is probably the highlight of the album for me. Just like a mind-blowingly cool performance. Really cool use of like suspended chords. To me, just those chords they play at the beginning and let ring out remind me so much of what the Police would be doing like a decade later. It really reminds me of Walking on the Moon. Um, so that's a connection I've always made just because I'm a big Police fan, is that part of me even wonders if some of what they did on Walking on the Moon was inspired by this live version of Funky Pretty that they did because of how similar they're structured. But yeah, I just adore this version. Like you guys said, I love the trading of the lead vocals, the guitar and the drums and the keys. It's all great. To me, this is like, if I had to point to what I love about the Beach Boys in the early 70s in this era, this is always the song that I show people. I make Beach Boys playlists for a lot of different people when I'm trying to get them into the band. And this is almost always like, if not the first song on the playlist, then like one of the first, because I think it's just so attention grabbing and a really exciting listen.
So following this, we have Let the Wind Blow, which is from Wild Honey. This is a really cool version of the song. I really love what they did with the arrangement here. They gave it kind of a more like, I don't really know how to describe it, but more like a bluesy, kind of like proggy sound to it. And I think it really works. Carl's vocals on this are great as always. I love that little instrumental section in the middle with the guitar and the keyboard. And yeah, it's another one of the highlights of the album for me. I think what really makes this one work is the fact that like the arrangement is so cool and different. Again, great vocals from Carl as well. So I've always really loved this version of the song. So
Yep, it's got a good car vocal. It's a nice arrangement. Nice tempo too. But yeah, I really enjoy it. And there's another one too that kind of cleaning up some of the muck from Wild Honey.
yeah.
You know, I totally agree with what you said, and I think it's a great performance from all involved. But to me, this is just one song on the album where I think the sort of prog treatment just doesn't do much for me.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of what moves me about the original song is the sparse arrangement and sort of the off-kilterness of all of it. And I think it just loses some of that like spooky, magical energy with this version. So I dig it, and I think it's a great vocal and a nice performance. But to me, it's not as moving or as interesting as the original version.
Riley, thoughts on live "Let the Wind Blow"?
Oh, then I might be misremembering the song. Is this the one where they say "Let the bees make honey"?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, thank God, because I was gonna be scared if it wasn't. Because I do really like this version. I had to remember for a bit because it's been a minute since I've listened to this specific version. I don't think it beats the album version, but like in terms of a live performance, this one kicks ass, man. It's still fantastic. I think Carl's on vocals, right?
Yep.
Yep.
All right, see, I'm remembering. I got it. I think he gives an incredible vocal. I think it doesn't beat like the lo-fi organ sound of the original version,
Yeah,
but
that's what I was kind
doesn't
of.
make it any better. Like I mean, it doesn't make it like doesn't make this version any worse. I think this version absolutely kicks ass, and I'm glad that they got to perform it live because I think this was easily one of their most forgotten songs.
Riley, I was joking with you earlier about how it took a while for that one Style Council song. What's the song again? I'm forgetting it already.
Ever changing moods.
Ever Changing Moods. It took a while for me to appreciate the single version because I always loved like that piano based ballad version. But I feel like that's kind of a similar case here where it's like I appreciate them both separately as like different songs.
Two different songs.
I love the lo-fi arrangement on Wild Honey and like Mike's vocals. But I also love this bluesier, more proggy arrangement with Carl singing it with his really like soulful voice. So I appreciate both about equally, I would say. I don't really have a
That's a
preference.
good way to put it. They're just two different songs.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Um,
even helps me appreciate it a bit more, just to think of it as like something else and not
right.
comparing it too much.
And I think it's a really creative arrangement too. Like it really fits like kind of the stage sound that they were going for around this time. So following "Let the Wind Blow," we have "Help Me, Rhonda." This song, they kind of give it kind of like with "Let the Wind Blow," they give it a different arrangement. They kind of give it like a more bluesy rock sound. I think it's a good performance, but I will say I definitely do prefer the original studio version of this. I miss that little like descending guitar part, like the do that's not on this version. And I think that it lacks it. That said, I do like the little break in the middle with the keyboard solo, and I think that the live band sounds really great on this one as they do throughout the album. But this isn't one of the performances that I come back to too often on here. I definitely do prefer the original "Help Me, Rhonda" as well as like some of their later live versions, like from live at Knebworth. So
Yeah, it's a nice rendition of Help Me Rhonda. They sing it well. I would say that a live version that I really like is that one that Dennis did, the lead vocal on, that's on Made in California. It's like kind of very bluesy. I really like that version.
yeah, it's like it's similar arrangement to this one, but it's just Dennis singing it. Yeah.
Similar arrangement, but yeah, Dennis singing it. I played it for my sister, who's not a huge Beach Boys fan. She said this is so much better than the original.
Mm.
This is my favorite song on the album.
Oh,
And it's not even close. Help Me Ron is one of my favorite Beach Boys songs of all time. But kind of how we just said earlier, I think these are two separate songs. I think that this one is very much different, and it took a little bit for it to click with me, but once it did, I think this particular year I listened to this version more than the other one. And I think by a long shot, I remember replaying it in the car. I'd go back and restart it at the beginning just so I could hear it again. I think the guitar rips so much, and Billy Hinchy's keyboard solo is so fucking cool.
yeah, I like that too.
Like I don't know, the arrangement's so sick, and it's very different from the album version and I guess the album versions that we got. And why that's one of my favorite Beach Boys songs. I think this one might just be both of them. I think this is just absolutely killer performance. It's so fucking cool. I love the guitar. I love the keyboard solo. I love that they're allowed to extend a Beach Boys classic into this like I don't even know if prog is the right word. Just it's just this awesome jam. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's really bold of a band to take one of their like number one hits that, like crowd pleaser and to reinvent it as much as they did with this. But I think it works really well. And I think it allows the band to show off some of their instrumental chops, maybe in a way that they couldn't on some of the other songs. And really there is a lot of blues influence and a blues feeling underpinning all the versions of Help Me Rhonda. but it's a little less obvious on the hit version because it's so buried underneath the whole California surfy kind of folk rock thing that they got going on. And on this version, a lot of just that straight rock and roll feeling gets to shine through. So it's really cool to hear this version.
All right, so following this, we have Surfer Girl, which is the first pre 1965 song on the album. I think that this is a really beautiful performance of the track. I will say I do miss hearing Brian's vocals during the bridge part, but I do think that Mike does a good job singing those parts. And overall, I think it's just a really good performance that really shows how tight their live vocals were around this time. So, really great performance of Surfer Girl.
Yep, I agree. Great performance. They do the vocals great. And I think that this album is a better showcase for a song like that because it's not drowned out by all the damn screaming like it on the first album.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's really nice to hear that. Nice to hear a 70s version of this.
Hold on, I'm chewing. It was a late night. I'm sorry.
He's chomping down his vegetables.
No, it's fucking pizza. Oh my god.
You're gonna make them choke.
The
On this episode, Jake kills Riley.
don't make me laugh more. All right, there we go. I'm always gonna be a huge fan of the original like studio version, so it's gonna be really hard to beat. But I think in terms of a live performance from '73, it shows that despite becoming this hard rocking band, they still have those harmonies and those vocal abilities. And I think honestly the most impressive part about this one is Mike Love doing the bridge because you kind of forget that he has a very tender voice if he uses it right. Because like oftentimes he won't use his voice right for this kind of stuff, but right here it sounds great. And yeah, I think it's a really cool version. I don't think I'll ever come back to it a lot, but I will very much enjoy it if I'm listening to the live concert, the live album.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Riley, you took the words right out of my mouth that the Beach Boys may have changed as mo more than you have or whatever it was, but when they get around the mic and the family members sing this song, it shows that really they hadn't changed maybe as much as they wanted everyone to think, and they were still those same boys when they got around the mic and sang a song like this. So it's just really touching to still hear those beautiful voices singing together. And, it wouldn't be too long after this that the band would start to splinter off into different factions. And so it's nice to hear them still singing all together on a song like this.
All right, so following Surfer Girl, we have Wouldn't It Be Nice, which is another Pet Sounds track. This is another moment on the album where Al just really shines. I think he sounds fantastic on lead on here, covering Brian's vocals. Just a really great lead from him. And really the whole band sounds so fantastic on this. Just a really tight performance. Love the backing vocals from the guys. And another one that just really shows what a great live act that these guys were around this time. Just a flawless performance of a song that, has a lot of studio tricks in the original version from Pet Sounds, but man, did they do a great job executing it here. So this is one of my favorite performances on the entire album. I love it.
Yep. Did an awesome job. Al kills it with the vocal. It's a nice, tight performance by the band and just a really great rendition of a classic song.
I think this is one of those songs, or at least this version of it, is one of those examples of like it's easy to just listen to it and be like, "Oh, that's cool." And then if you picture like them actually performing it live, you'd have to be it would be so fucking cool to watch this. Like you see Al walk up to like the microphone and just like give us such a great vocal, so much energy. There's so much life in this version. I'm like, I can't not picture them performing this live in some small concert hall too, where like it's and it's so like it's just so cool to think of. It's very charming, and I love this version. I don't think it'll ever beat the studio one. I think it's Pet Sounds is a pretty hard like thing to beat, but I think this is a great live song, and I'm glad that they got to do this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, what I think is so great about this version is, the Beach Boys had been playing this song live ever since the album Pet Sounds came out, and you can hear them play it on live in London as well as some of the 66 or 67 box sets that have come out since. But when they had started playing it during the first few years after Pet Sounds came out, when they were still more or less a self-contained unit, Wouldn't It Be Nice always suffered a little bit. And it's not until, this version, 72, 73, when they've got a big band behind them, that they can finally sort of give songs like this the full arrangement they deserve and play it with justice. And I think it's just so impressive that you know, they had some very early synthesizers like the Moog and things like that on stage, but really they were just being extremely creative with how they layered the guitars and the piano and the organ and the flute and all these different instruments to try to recreate what Brian did in the studio. And to me, this recording is one of the best examples of like a wall of sound live on stage type of situation, and they just pull it off flawlessly, where it still has that grandiosity that the original version has.
Yeah, for me, this is like the essential live version of this song. I mean, it's just an incredible performance from start to finish. So I love it. Um, okay, so after this, we have We Got Love, which is kind of an interesting track because this is one that was originally intended to go on Holland, but it was rejected, the original version of Holland that the band submitted to Warner Reprise. So in its place, they added Sail on Sailor and removed We Got Love. This song, though, in terms of this live version, I have to say it was a bit of a grower for me. I never cared too much for the studio version that the band intended to put on Holland, so I think that that maybe kind of scared me away from this version. But when I re-listened to this version around the time that we did the Holland episode, I actually really enjoyed it a lot, and it's now one that I come back to quite a bit. I think it's a really great Blondie and Ricky song. It really kind of highlights like the unique sound that they brought to the group. I love the keyboard and guitar playing on this live version. I wish that the studio version had that same energy because I think I would like it a lot more. I will say it goes on maybe a minute longer than I would have liked it to, but that said, I really do enjoy it a lot. And it's definitely one of the more underrated tracks on the album, and one that I don't think a lot of people really know about just because it never made a Beach Boys studio album. So I'm glad that this track got featured on this album, even though it got rejected from Holland. So what do you guys think of We Got Love?
Um, yeah, I've never been the biggest fan of this song. I think maybe this was a little bit better, but I can definitely see why this was replaced with Sail on Sailor. But it is nice that at least it got a platform because I think this was the first, I mean, this was the only version that was officially released for like 40 years almost. I don't think that I don't think that the other version came out until like 2015 officially, like the studio one. Other than like I know there was that rare German, I think it was like Miss Press that had it as the first song, but no, that cost several $100s. So yeah, kind of how I am with it.
Yeah, I'm as Matt said, this was the only officially released version. I think it would have been really easy for the band to just pick like Here She Comes or any of the other Ricky and Blondie songs to be released and call it a day, but they kind of gave them another shot of getting one of their originals out there, which I think is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this version particularly is much better than the studio version. I like the studio version as is, but the more I listen to this one, the more I love it. I'm kind of surprised that this wasn't released in any fashion, and yet they instead released Child of Winter, but whatever.
A Mickey Mouse snowman.
It's that time of the year. But yeah, I think this song is so full of emotion, and I wish it got released as like a single or something, but I'm glad that they finally got it out there in some fashion because I mean they obviously liked it enough to perform it live.
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly think it's one of the highlights of the album. I think it's just the vocals are great. I love the performance. I love the guitar too. That guitar is so underrated in this song. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, you guys put it perfectly. I always go back and forth on whether I prefer the studio version or this version, but it's a great tune, and I'm so surprised they didn't push it more for a studio album inclusion or potential single. But like you guys said, I'm thrilled that it ended up on here.
Yeah.
Yeah, non-album singles around this time. They definitely did Child of Winter. That was a non-album single. Uh,
Right.
so like I mean, dude, why not? I honestly more than anything, like why not? Why did they record it? They used a shit ton of money to record Holland and this song. Why not put it out?
Yeah. I think honestly, like of all the songs on here, this is like one of the ones that really showcases like the live band is like performers. Like love the keyboard playing. Like Riley said, the guitar on here is especially great. I love that little middle section where like there's a real cool guitar solo. Just a really great arrangement of this song. And I think it definitely elevates it to new heights compared to the original studio version that they did. So all right, so following this, we now get what's kind of like a string of their early hits to close the album. So we have Don't Worry Baby, which I think is a really great live performance. This is another one of the highlights of the album for me. I really like how they split the lead vocal between Al on the verses and Carl on the chorus. I think that that works really well. The vocal harmonies on this are as beautiful as ever. And it's probably my favorite live performance I've ever heard of the song. Just a really, really well done performance. I think this is a song that had been out of the set list for a long time. I don't even know if it ever really was in the set list after like the mid 60s. And then they reintroduced it in the early 70s, and they did a fantastic job with it. So I really love this performance.
Yep, I agree. The vocals are great, harmonies are nice. It's a beautiful song. And I think they really do it justice. And I think both Carl and Al have amazing voices. Though I will say sometimes very easy to confuse the two. Sometimes I'm like, is this Carl or this Al? I have to like think about it for a second.
Surprisingly, like
I always
surprisingly easy to confuse them, man, because like they have pretty distinct voices, but
Riley.
oh, yeah, like I said, this I surprisingly they have like similar voices in this song. I think Al gives a great vocal here. I think it's really hard to beat Brian's from '64, but I think Al's giving it his best, and he's always been there to fill in for Brian's vocals. This is one of those songs, especially you're just never gonna beat the original, but again, it's one of those things that they play the song live, and it just comes out way better than it has any right being. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think there's so much sort of boyish charm to the original version that it almost sounds happy. It sounds very like upbeat and like sing along almost. And some of the like sadness or almost desperation of the song sort of gets lost with how just joyful the original studio version sounds. And I think this version sort of gets across the unease or sort of the anxiety that the song is singing about better than the original does. I'd say I like, the original is just such a beautiful recording and one of the greatest recordings ever made, but this version definitely gets across that intensity in a more palpable way.
Yeah, I think some of it maybe also comes from like I think Al's vocal. I've seen some people complain a bit about Al's vocal on this. There's like this discussion about like, oh, he sounds like too strained, like he's not doing Brian's part well. I disagree. I think it's great. And I almost feel like that little bit of strain in his voice as he hits the high notes almost gives it like some more emotion for me. Um,
Totally.
and I just think, yeah, I just think it's a very moving performance. I agree with you, Nate. I think it almost has more of like a melancholic undertone to it, this version. Like you can definitely hear a hint of sadness in this version. So
I don't think people realize how impressive it is for Al because Al is singing pure chest voice. Brian was able to kind of
Right.
dip in and out of his falsetto and regular voice. Al is not even going falsetto. He's just going straight from here. And I think that's honestly a bit more impressive than what Brian can do because like Brian's falsetto, as godly as it is, it's kind of his natural voice, just falsetto. And like Al is physically putting in the work to hit those notes, and he's hitting them.
yeah.
It's really hard to like, pretty easy to miss that, but it's so damn impressive.
Yeah. All right. So after Don't Worry Baby, we have Surfing USA. I think this is a really great high energy performance. Love Mike's vocal, love the guitar on it. I'm pretty sure I might be wrong, but I think this is the one where Mike maybe goofs on a few lyrics. I've never really noticed it, but I've just noticed people have pointed it out. So I thought I would mention that, but I do really like this performance a lot, and I think this really shows like how great the live band was at this time at performing the early hits. I think it's great. So
Yeah, I think it's a really great cover. Excuse me. It's got a great energy. I love the sound of the guitar on it, and I think that they're doing a classic well. I know I've been saying it a lot throughout this episode, but really I do think that a lot of these classics they're kind of bringing a nice fresh energy into them. It's almost like hearing them. It's like I like hearing them for the first time.
yep.
Yeah.
I feel like this is what the song should have been in 1963. Like, imagine they released this, like, oh my God, like the amount of punk that I think punk would have started like 7 years sooner. They released it like this. Because holy shit, man, the energy's there. I think it's Al doing the falsetto on this where he does "Everybody's Gone, Sir." Is that him? Um,
Yeah.
he's doing a damn good job. Um, dude, this song is just so full of energy. Mike's giving a fucking like swagger vocal on it. It's oh my God, this is my version of Surfing USA. I think like maybe June or July I might listen to like the studio version, but any other time I'm listening, it's gonna be this version. This one fucking kicks ass.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that I prefer this version too. It's definitely the one I come back to more. The studio version, I like it, but this one is the one I always want to hear. I love it.
Yeah, this one really for me, the most standout element is Mike's vocal is just so confident, so clear, so charismatic that just even listening to it, you can picture him doing his Mike Love thing on stage, somewhere between strolling and running back and forth around the stage. And yeah, just really, you know, they still use this recording on a lot of like Beach Boys like TV spots, or when they play that little intro video before the show, they'll use this version of Surfing USA just because it's so captivating and so larger than life.
Hmm.
Who's doing the guitar solo? Was Ed Carter on that or was that Blondie?
I assume probably Carl actually. I think Carl gave away obviously a lot of the leads during this time and afterwards, but I think Surfing USA is one of the songs where he would sort of
I mean, yeah, he
fulfill
was going to
his
do the original
original
solo,
role.
so I don't see why not.
Yeah.
Because I could
Yeah.
easily see him because at this point he kind of moved to more rhythm guitar, and then Blondie kind of took some leads. Ed Carter took some leads on the guitar, so wouldn't be shocked. But
Yeah. It
Yeah,
definitely.
and to my ears, it sounds like on a lot of these songs on this album, especially a lot of these like surf ones, it sounds like it might even be Carl and Al or Carl and Blondie, like multiple people kind of playing the solos at once because it's just sort of a frenzy of guitar on some of these
they
songs.
might go like back and forth between each other.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so only two tracks left on the album, and the first of those two is "Good Vibrations." So this is one of those songs that like is really hard to replicate live, just because of all the studio trickery that's being done on it. It's just like a masterpiece of studio production. That said, I think the band does a great job at this. I think Carl sounds fantastic on it. I think like kind of like what Nate was saying earlier. I think early on in the band's live act, like in the late '60s, I don't think that they could do this song fully justice. Where at this point, when you've got the full backing band behind you with Ed Carter and Carly Munoz and Billy Hinchy, I think they do it justice. I don't prefer it to the original. I think the original is a masterpiece, and the production is really what elevates it for me above this version. But I do think they do a really good job with it, and I'm sure the crowd was very thrilled to hear this because as soon as Carl sings that opening note, everybody just screams. So, great performance.
Yeah, I agree. Great performance. The vocals sound great. I love the instrumentation. Sounds wonderful, nice and tight. Yeah, this is one of those songs that like I don't think you're ever gonna top the studio just because it
Yeah.
kind of is a studio song. But this is a very nice rendition of it, and it's nice to finally hear it totally fleshed out because I know there's some version of it in the mid 60s, mid late 60s on one of the many box sets. I can't remember what box it is at this point, but you can tell it's definitely a lot more stripped back.
Yeah.
I don't remember which one. It's either on Made in California or it's on Good Vibrations. I can't remember at this point. There's just too many damn box sets.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts as I did to Heroes and Villains, but I actually think a little bit less than how I thought of Heroes and Villains because I think that this one they did a much better job doing this one live. I think this one is a little bit easier to do live with the
Mhm.
sections because the sections aren't as pronounced as they are in Heroes and Villains, where it's really like five different songs built into one.
Mhm.
I think the flow between the sections is a lot smoother. I think the vocals are fantastic. I think Carl does an excellent vocal. I love the way he can hit those high notes similar to Brian could. I mean, I know Carl sang good lead on Good Vibrations on the studio version, but in the same
Yeah.
way that Brian would. Um, but yeah, I think this is a hard one to do live, but I think that they pulled off much better than they did Heroes and Villains. And I can see why that the fans got excited. This would be like if Matt, you're more in line with 2010s like pop artists.
Hmm.
Like this is like if you saw like a band from 2010 to 2013-ish performing like one of the big hits from that year now, you'd be like, "Oh shit, they're doing that song that was famous 10 years ago."
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen one like live like that, but I will say I went to an EDM thing with my friend last year, and when they played Justin Bieber's Beauty and the Beat, the entire place was singing the damn song. So you're right. It just makes the crowd go nuts.
Yeah, because you kind of forget how relatively recent Good Vibrations was huge. Like it
Yeah.
was a number one hit.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Riley, it's like when Taylor Swift plays Bad Blood. Everybody just gets up
yeah,
and
except it's actually good, you know? It's like
Nate.
Yeah, I gotta be honest with this one. Obviously, It's a good performance, and obviously everything you guys said is true. But to me, Good Vibrations is one of those songs where it never really, in my mind, truly sounded right on stage until honestly, like maybe the last 10 or 15 years when they could finally incorporate, like samplers and synthesizers on stage to really recreate some of those sounds with the cellos and the echo and different things. And to me, this song always just sounded very strange when
Fair.
it's, yeah, bare. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Like so much of Good Vibrations is like the effects that they used and the different studio trickery. So it just always sounds a little off to me on stage. And this is to me a great example of the performance can be out of sight, but it's just still missing that little magic that Brian did in the studio. So to me, this one maybe as much as I think it's possibly like one of the greatest songs ever written, of course, it of all the songs on the album, to me, this one is maybe the one that falls the most flat. But obviously, it's just an insane task to bring that song to life on stage. So
Yeah.
great performance, but this one just sort of more obviously pales in comparison to the original than the others do, I would say.
Yeah. All right, so the album closes with one of the Beach Boys' most iconic concert closers, Fun, Fun, Fun. Like my thoughts on Surfing USA, I think it's an awesome performance of the song. Probably my favorite live version of Fun, Fun, Fun. I'm kind of split between this one and the Knebworth version, for which one I come back to more. But yeah, I really love this performance. Great lead vocal from Mike. Love the guitar solo. The band's just really rocking out. And this is definitely the version I come back to the most, I would say. I definitely listen to this one more than I do the original studio recording, as great as that is, too. So great way to close the album. And yeah, just a great way to end a really great album.
Yeah, I think it's full of energy. It packs a nice punch. It's a great rendition of the song. And this is one of those songs that, like I think we've mentioned earlier, where like it just rips live. It just gets the crowd going. It's so much fun. It's a great burst of energy. And I think that this is a much better closer than it's a much better closer than Johnny Be Good. It's also a much better closer than I'm sure we've all seen that Full House episode where they close with Barbara Ann. That's Jake's favorite song. So this is
Oh,
much, much better than that.
Riley?
Yeah, no, I love this live version. If I were to rank it though, I would probably go because I like all the versions.
Mm-hmm.
In concert 73, no, concert 64, in concert 73, studio, and then Knebworth on top. I think the Knebworth version is so fucking good. And if we ever get around to talking about it, the Knebworth show, I will talk about that one for hours. I love that particular version. I feel like that's the 73 one, like on steroids. But I do love this version. I think it absolutely kicks ass. I love the guitar on it. I think this song deserves that. I don't know if it's fuzz face or just the overdrive cranked all the way to the max, whatever. That song needs it. I just kind of wish they had that. They were able to extend it a bit more than they kind of did because I feel like unlike the Knebworth version, that one's like 5 minutes and you have the extended intro.
Outro, too.
The outro is like 2 minutes on its own, and that's kind of how I want it to close. But maybe they just didn't know yet that that's what they should have been doing. I don't know, but this version still kicks ass. I love the overdrive guitars. It's a great wall of sound, as Nate said, and I feel like that fits this song well.
I think it's so serendipitous that this album closes with this song and that our discussion began with the concert version of this song because you think more or less 10 years earlier the band had such a hard time bringing this song to life on stage that they had to use like a chipmunk sped up version of the studio version, and to think that 10 years later, they were playing such a ripping, rocking, proud, just definitive version of the song on stage with confidence and bravado. It's just a brilliant ladder to have watched them climb from the first album we discussed to this. So I think it's just the perfect way to not only close out the album, but to draw the discussion sort of full circle.
So that concludes the concert and in-concert part of our discussion, but we did want to touch on a few other Beach Boys live albums that they've released over the years. The three that we're going to talk about are Live in London, Live at Knebworth, and then the 50th reunion album, which came out in 2013. So, to start out with Live at London, this is kind of a strange album. I believe it was kind of like a contractual obligation where they needed to release one more album for Capitol. So this is what they put out. Nate, do you want to go into a little bit of the history behind that album, Live at London?
I gotta be honest, that's really all I really know about it. I don't think they really put any mind towards it or spent much time on it. Like you said, it was just contractual obligation. Let's bring a tape recorder with us. Let's knock this out. Let's be done with this deal.
What's weird, they called it Beat 69 later on, but it was actually recorded in 68.
Do you guys have any general thoughts on that album from the last time that you listened to it? Any thoughts on the tracks?
My general thought is that it's if you like this what we just talked about, the in concert from 73, this is like kind of like the sneak preview. Like you guys remember when you used to have DVDs when we were little and it would say like coming soon to DVD. This
Yeah.
is sort of like what that is to the in concert album. Because yeah, you get the hits, Barbara Ann and that, but you get a little bit of that. The band is growing. We're starting to rock out a little more. It's not all the way there yet, but you can sort of get a glimpse of the future. So that's what I like about this album.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I would say they're like really rocking quite yet, but I would rather say that in the same way that In Concert from 73 captures that 73 period, 72, 73 period with Ricky and Blondie really well. And it kind of that transitions, not necessarily transitions, like parallels onto the live shows. I feel like this kind of parallels the albums that they've been doing with the live shows that they were doing then. You see damn near just like the lo-fi stuff, Wild Honey Friends.
They
I
did
like some of the renditions, but I gotta be honest, I feel like while I appreciate the live band like growing, and I do think this is better than In Concert and or Concert 64, they haven't really hit their stride yet, like
Yep.
with the live shows. Like you see them growing, and like while I like some of the versions, I really like the version of Wake the World on
Yep.
this one.
Yep.
It's they're not quite there yet. I kind of wish they actually got a real live concert from 1970 rather than a concert from like 68 and just said let's call it like Live in London or whatever. Because I think they probably could have done that, and I would much rather hear like the little Sunshine Pop era. I'd love to hear like a live version of Dennis Singing Forever, something like that. But instead, we kind of got this like half-ass live concert thing, barely any overdubs. I feel like they put less effort into this than they did Concert 64. But
For sure. Yeah.
I do like some of the live renditions, though. I think they did Wild Honey on this one, right?
No.
Dang, man,
Aren't you glad?
Game.
They
Glad,
did,
yeah.
they did Aren't You Glad?
Harlan.
Wake the World, which I also really love. That actually is probably my preferred version of Wake the World. I really love their version of it on here.
Is that the one where Mike is like, we're going to turn the lights down?
Yep, and the crowd all like screams. Yeah.
I do like some of the stuff, though. I did really like Aren't You Glad? Now that I'm looking at it. That was the Wild Honey track I was thinking of. I really liked their version of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring. I thought that was cool. A little weird hearing the Four Freshmen song without Brian on it. But
It is nice that finally got included on an album.
right. But I feel like they didn't really hit the apex of their live shows yet. They didn't really have it all there, but it is pretty good. But I don't think I'd ever really show this to anybody really looking for live Beach Boys. If you're looking for live Beach Boys, just listen to In Concert 73 or Knebworth.
Yep. I kind of view it like a time capsule for that era, and like for that reason, it's cool. Like you get to hear what the band sounded like during this kind of weird period for them, where like they were like really popular still in the UK, but in the US they were kind of like really at their lowest point. But yeah, some cool performances on here. Like Riley mentioned, Aren't You Glad is cool to hear live. I think Mike does a great job on the lead on that, and that Wake the World version, I absolutely love it. I think it's great. So
That's definitely the highlight for me. Wake the
Um,
World.
Can I just say something real quick? So it has been a while since I've heard this, a number of years, but I will say, from what I remember, yeah, it's kind of this weird transitional album of like the live band is kind of getting there, but they're still kind of in this weird state of flux. It is very low key. If you like that more stripped back thing, you'll love this because that's what this is. But I do agree, Wake the World is probably the highlight from what I remember. There also is an outtake on the Rarities album of them performing All I Want to Do.
Mhm.
Sunflower one, the 2021. So that's kind of cool to hear that live, I guess. It's never been my favorite song, but kind of cool to hear it live. Doesn't have the surprise at the end, but that's fine. But yeah, it's just a very kind of low key kind of
Yeah,
record. It's a good vibey record, I guess, if nothing else, but certainly not the, as Riley said, certainly not the apex of them as a live act.
All right, so we'll now move on to the next album we wanted to touch on. I believe it's Good Timin' live at Knebworth. So this was originally recorded in 1980, but I believe it actually like came out in like the early 2000s, like the actual album version of this. This is kind of a cool performance in terms of like history because it was like their last time where all of the Beach Boys, all the original guys, performed overseas in England. I think it's a really great performance. Some really high energy performances of songs like "Fun, Fun, Fun," Barbara Ann, "Surfin' USA." This is a period where like the band really like cranked up the guitars and really like rocked out on these songs, which I think is why Riley really appreciates it. A couple of charming moments too. I believe they sing "Happy Birthday" to Brian on here, which is pretty fun. Also, they do versions of Lady Linda, which is pretty cool. The version of "Keeping the Summer Alive" on here rocks. Definitely my favorite version of that song. I think it kicks the studio version's ass. And yeah, it's cool to hear the band, even though they're definitely kind of in their nostalgia phase here. It's still cool to hear them doing a couple of their recent songs, and all the oldies sound really great. The one thing I will say is I know that they auto-tuned Mike's vocals on at least one of the releases of this, and people have complained about that. It is definitely noticeable. But besides that, yeah, I think it's a really cool album.
I think it's also cool to have a decent sounding version of Dennis singing "You Are So Beautiful" because that I am convinced that he helped co-write the song. I know that that's never been confirmed, but it sounds like a Dennis song to me.
It's totally a Dennis song. Yeah, you can
There,
just hear it.
going back to this, yes, it is very nice to have a nice live version of "You Are So Beautiful" because, like I said, that was Dennis's signature song for so many years, and most of the versions are in pretty shit quality, so it's nice to have one that sounds pretty good. And I also really quite enjoy the version of Surfer Girl on here because Brett and Brown is there, and then Dennis gets to go up to the mic and you get to hear his voice in the mix. Those are highlights for me on this album.
Yeah, man, I really like this one. I think Jake kind of hit the nail on the head. I'm a big fan of the classics. I like the classics, I think, as much, if not as a little bit more than the 70s stuff. But I like I like pretty much everything the Beach Boys have done. But Jake did hit the nail on the head. This is the classics cranked up to 11. And I think this was a concert film. I think that's why it took a
Yeah.
while to.
Yeah.
And instead of actually playing the track "Good Timin'," they have like the backing track, and then you have like Al Jardine doing like an intro. But in the intro, Al says something that makes a lot of sense as to why I like this too. It's the last time all five of the original members were playing like they used to, for like the last time, because Dennis would be gone soon. They would fully transition into the oldies act, and they didn't really have the same spunk that they did back in 73. But this is like the last time you have all five members at the top of their game at the same time.
Mhm.
Uh, and you hear that in pretty much every song because they go through everything with so much energy. I love Mike's vocal on "California Girls." Even "Keeping the Summer Alive," a track that I've like kind of been okay on, they absolutely rip through it. That's my go-to version of the song. You have arguably my go-to version of "Fun, Fun, Fun." Um, the intro is padded out. You have like the guitar for like a minute straight, and then out of nowhere they rip right into it. The outro of like ooh, I'm not even gonna try to do it. There you go. But I think they kind of play to the crowd with that one because you have like pretty much every member of the band trying the falsetto, and you hear like five people not doing a good job at all. But that's kind of not really the point. You kind of want the crowd to sing along with it. You want the crowd to all try that falsetto. I love the smaller moments like "Happy Birthday" to Brian.
Yeah.
I love Dennis singing "You Are So Beautiful." It really is like not so much a time capsule, but like if you were to end like the story of the Beach Boys, this would be the perfect point to end it
Yeah.
because it's
Sort of
kind of
like how they did in the movie recently,
yeah,
even
you
though
know,
that was
as much as I
98.
love Beach Boys
And book
85,
too.
as much as I love Beach Boys 85, this is the storybook ending to the band with all five members being back on the top of their game. And you
The
know what?
book.
Bruce does a pretty good job too. So I don't think it's better than musically speaking, I don't think it's better than In Concert
I
73.
don't. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think you're gonna beat like that full jam band vibe that they had on that album. But if you were to like do like a storybook chapter by chapter, like listen to through of the Beach Boys like albums and stories, I would say you get like Endless Summer, Pet Sounds, Sunflower, Holland, and maybe this one. I don't know. It's a damn good album, and it has a very good vibe to it. It's definitely worth a listen if you're a fan of the hits. It's kind of like In Concert 73, but just like their Endless Summer hits and a couple of
Yeah.
stuff from the late 70s.
Yeah. I also wanted to quickly say the version of God Only Knows on here is like one of my favorite live versions of it. It's between this one and the one that believe there's a version of it from Carnegie Hall and like the Sail and Sailor box set that I really like as well from like 72, 73. But this is like one of the versions I come back to the most of God Only Knows. I love it.
Yeah, it's a great rendition.
Yeah,
Nate?
with this album, I'd say it's definitely easy if you're coming right off the heels of In Concert. It's easy to miss Ricky and Blondie, what they added, but there is a certain magic that is brought back to the music by having Dennis back on the drums and Bruce back in the vocal stack. Brian's kind of there, kind of not. He sort of makes a few cameos, but for the most part, you're not hearing too much Brian. And even though Bruce doesn't really have any leads, just having Bruce in the stack adds a lot to the harmonies and makes them sound very, the way you hear them on the recordings, originally on the studio recordings. I think just that the sort of the aims of the shows or the albums as they became were evolving between these different albums. In Concert is very, I'd say they're showing off their musicality and they're trying to be taken seriously as musicians versus on this Knebworth, they've already made it to the peak of their careers more or less, and they're had a rejuvenated level of fame. So the Knebworth one's a lot more just about fun and excitement and energy. So it's kind of like different strokes for different folks on which one you like better between these two that we're talking about now, but they're both outstanding documents of the Beach Boys as just incredible live performers and entertainers.
One quick thing I wanted to mention, another kind of like historical document that relates to this album. There's a recording I recently discovered that's on YouTube. And Nate, I'm sure you've heard it at some point, but it's like a bootleg recording of like the rehearsals for this
Yeah,
performance.
yeah.
And it's really cool because if you listen to it, you get to hear like what a leadership role Carl had. Like he's giving all these different directions in terms of like the guitars and like the different sounds. And you also hear there's some really like wholesome, fun moments between like I think it's Carl, Al, Mike, and Brian where they're like goofing around and laughing and making jokes. So I just wanted to mention that. Maybe I'll link that in the comments below. But thought that was
It's also it's interesting to note too that they performed, well, really just Bruce. I write the songs as part of their Knebworth set, and it wasn't on the CD because of like a whole rights, like they couldn't secure the rights for the song or whatever, with different labels or whatever. But they actually, it's hard to even imagine it now, but amongst all the oldies, Surf, Be True to Your School, all that of Knebworth, there is I Write the Songs was included in
Dude, it
that
was a hit.
performance.
It was a hit.
that would if Riley was at the concert, that would have been when he went to take a piss.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we'll move on from Knebworth to what is to date the last Beach Boys live album, the 50th reunion tour album, which came out in 2013. So I'll be honest, I've never fully listened to this album. I've only heard selected tracks from it. I know that this album is very frequently criticized for being like auto-tuned to hell. From the tracks I have heard on it, it's definitely very noticeable. I can see why they auto-tune the guys. They obviously don't sound as good as they once did in the past. I mean, they're, at this point they were 70 years old, so it's completely understandable. But yeah, the auto-tune is a bit of a turnoff. It is cool that they did so many like songs on that tour and they included a lot of them on that album as well. Some deep cuts like All This Is That. And some material from some of the early 70s albums as well. But yeah, all in all, it's not one that I really have ever listened to in its entirety. And I think the comments about it kind of scare me away from it in terms of like giving it a full listen.
No comment.
Okay, Riley.
Well, I got a couple of comments. I this is definitely not the band at their like musical peak. Far from it. You definitely have cases of autotune, although I don't think they auto-tuned Al. I don't think they needed to. I think Al has the golden voice. So,
Yeah.
um, and it's definitely scary. And while I don't listen to the album that much, I definitely have gone to YouTube and like seen live clips from the concert though.
Me too. Me too.
And it's honestly some of the clips that I see the most of, really. Um, because I do really like the sentiment of the album. I love that you have Carl still singing God Only Knows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's funny because you have like the video of like Paul McCartney singing with John Lennon. They're like, oh, he's playing with John. And the Beach Boys did it like 10 years earlier. Because funnily enough, the Beach Boys do have the ripped just vocals from those songs. Unlike Paul, who had to use AI to get John's voice out there. So I think that's pretty funny. But you have Carl singing God Only Knows. You have Dennis singing Forever.
Yeah.
Then you even have David Marks singing Get You Back, which is pretty cool. I mean, I don't think he doesn't really have that great of a voice, but I'm glad that he gets some representation. And you still have some old members of the touring band. I think Ed Carter was still with them, right?
Not
Ed
at this
Carter is
point,
just
but Jeff
never,
Foskett was there.
Oh,
yeah, but you have like some long-term guys who have been with many of the different parties of the band. Well, again, it's not the band at the musical apex. It's still really cool and really sweet to see all of them come together one last time for a tour. And I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice to not check out some of like the concert clips. I think the best one I've seen is like a full like rip of the full concert is them playing in Japan.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's the one I would go watch. As far as I know, there's not as much auto tune on that like performance. They do a couple of songs I think that aren't on like the official like concert thing. There's a couple of you could find clips of them doing still cruising actually out there, which I think is really cool. But
There's
don't not listen to the not necessarily that. Don't like not look or watch like some of the clips if you're like worried about auto tune. Like, dude, you can even just put it on mute and have a good time because like just seeing like all like damn near retirement getting back together one last time is really cool. So it's definitely worth looking at. Just give it a shot.
Yeah, it's on Blu-ray as well. I don't know which concert version that is. Are you drinking Sunkissed out of the thing?
Hey, you know
Very on brand.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, this live Sunkissed album, right? Or this or the compilation, yeah.
Yeah.
Dude, I have to study for finals, so I'm staying up anyways. It doesn't matter.
Good luck with that.
Nate.
Yeah, so I really do have a soft spot in my heart for this album. Because I'm like a Beach Boys concert junkie, so whenever I'm in the long stretches where I'm not seeing them, which is usually like this time of year when they're off the road, that I'll spin this album a lot to sort of get those memories going. And to me, it's just a really amazing celebration of everything that they accomplished together and of all the great songs that they wrote. And it's really neat to hear some of the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s song and 2000s for that matter, all these different decades of music side by side. And yeah, I really think a highlight of the album is John Cowsill's fabulous drumming. He drummed with the Beach Boys from 2008 to 2023, and so I think his drumming on here is just out of sight. And yeah, hearing all those voices together one last time is just so touching. And sort of like Riley was alluding to, like, yeah, there is autotune, there is some doctoring like there is on any live album. But like he said, I would not let that persuade people away from listening to the album or at least checking it out once. I think it's very touching, a lot of good songs, so you can't really go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think for like the live act at this point, like during this reunion tour, I think having a visual that goes along with it definitely makes me appreciate it more. Like, I know, like, if I was there, if I had the chance to see one of those concerts, I wouldn't give a crap how they sounded. I would just be thrilled to be there and see the guys, all on stage together again. But yeah, like seeing those videos, like what Riley mentioned, live in Japan, and a couple of other concert videos, I really enjoy those. It's just that in terms of this album, there's not really many times where like I'm thinking I want to sit down and listen to the guys sing these songs, at like
In their 70s, yeah.
I'd just rather listen to the studio versions or listen to the live band when they were at their peak. But I can see what you mean, Nate, in terms of like it is a cool kind of like a way of kind of capturing their whole legacy in one big album, one big live album. So
Yeah.
all right, should we wrap it up there? Or do you guys have any final thoughts you wanted to mention about any of the albums that we've discussed tonight?
There's one more thing I wanted to say that I would consider in concert the gold standard of recording of live albums.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's was just so brilliantly recorded that that they almost sound like studio recordings, especially on some of the quieter songs like Caroline No.
Yeah.
Just the audience, like there's very little screaming, and when there is, it's tastefully mixed and it doesn't like blare in your ears like on their first live album.
Yeah.
And just all the instruments and a great stereo mix. So I just love the way that in concert sounds.
Yeah. It's funny because the two main albums we talked about tonight are really like night and day in terms of like the production and just like the overall sound. Like one was kind of a, kind of rushed thing where like they did a lot of overdubbing to try to fix a lot of these songs to make them sound better, while the in concert album is like really the band at their live peak. And like, yeah, but like you said, the mixing on that is perfect. I agree about the audience. I think that it's mixed perfectly where the audience comes in and out at the right time. It's never distracting in any way, and it really makes you feel like you're at the concert, which I love. So, all right. So,
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I was
Riley.
gonna say, I think it's pretty crazy that when I think of like my favorite like live acts, or I guess like, granted, I've never seen them live at their performance peak,
Yeah.
at least not yet for one of them. Oasis. I think it's crazy that you look at some of my favorite live acts of all time. Like I mentioned, Oasis is Knebworth from '96. Pink Floyd performing The Wall in 1980. Led Zeppelin's The Song Remains the Same from '73, I think is when they recorded it. And then and it's in that mix of like hard rock, heavier bands. You have the freaking Beach Boys. It's crazy to think, like I said in the beginning, they went from like the worst live act of all time in like '62 when they're like barely able to play on stage. And then all of a sudden, 11 years later, you have one of the greatest live albums of all time ever recorded.
Yeah.
If you
And
haven't listened to it, go listen to it.
And I feel like sometimes the Beach Boys get a bad rap as a live band. Like people are very dismissive of them. Like a lot of classic rock people, they're like, oh, like, yeah, I've heard they're never that great on stage. Like you got to listen to in concert because that totally disproves that. I'm not saying, like Riley mentioned, early on, they weren't that great. They weren't that tight of a live band. And there's definitely been periods throughout their history where they weren't sounding that great. But for a while, especially the early 70s and a bit around the late 70s, like this band was really at the top of their game live. They sounded fantastic and really talented musicians backing them as well, which really helped with their sound. So, all right, so we will wrap it up there. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this 40th episode of Good Timin.
Damn, we did 40 of these?
40 episodes,
Oh my
man.
God.
40 episodes. And I want to mention, too, it's been, I believe, when this episode comes out, it'll be 1 year since we started this podcast. So,
God
Wow.
damn, I'm getting old.
yeah. So really appreciate all of you listening. And
Very crazy to think when we started this, I couldn't legally drink, and now I can.
Yeah, man, it's been a lot of fun, and really appreciate everyone's support. We see all of your comments every week, and we really appreciate it. You guys motivate us to keep this show going. So I had a great time talking about the Beach Boys tonight and all their live albums with you guys, and I'm definitely going to be re-listening to some of the live tracks and recordings that we talked about in the near future. So as always, if you like this podcast and want to hear more, feel free to subscribe or follow wherever you're listening. We greatly appreciate the support as it motivates us to make more episodes in the future. Also, as a reminder, the Good Timin podcast is available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So there's plenty of different places to listen and keep up with the show. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you all next time. Bye-bye.